After my own 9-year-old son raised his hand and struck me across the face, the room fell dead silent. Everyone sitting at that mahogany dining table expected me to break down, scream, or pack my bags in defeat. Instead, I did the exact opposite. The very next afternoon, I quietly cooked his absolute favorite meal and delivered it to him with a smile. He smirked, entirely convinced I had surrendered to the family hierarchy. But he had no idea what was actually waiting for him at the bottom of that lunchbox. My name is Simone. I am 32 years old, and for a decade I survived inside the suffocating walls of Atlanta's most elite social circles. As a forensic accountant, my entire career revolves around uncovering hidden truths and exposing financial lies. But at home, I was treated like the dirt beneath my husband's expensive shoes. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta meant I knew the value of a hard-earned dollar. I built my career from the ground up, navigating complex corporate audits and tracing missing funds for major firms. But marrying DeAndre Davenport pulled me into a world where old money dictated your human value. The Davenports were black royalty in Buckhead. He was arrogant, chronically unfaithful, and obsessed with maintaining the illusion of generational superiority. His mother, Corinne, ruled the family with an iron fist. Then there was Camille, my sister-in-law. She was married to DeAndre's older brother, Darius, a commercial pilot who was constantly away on international flights. Camille spent her days posing as a luxury lifestyle influencer on social media funded entirely by the family wealth, while secretly conducting a torrid affair with my husband. The absolute breaking point happened during a suffocating Sunday dinner at the main Davenport estate. The dining room was a showcase of excessive wealth. I was sitting quietly, exhausted from a grueling 60-hour workweek. My 9-year-old son, Jalen, sat across from me. He was completely absorbed in his tablet, ignoring the bowl of soup the private chef had just placed in front of him. "Jalen, please put the screen away while we are at the dinner table," I said gently, keeping my voice perfectly level. Jalen did not even look at me. Instead, his eyes darted straight to his father at the head of the table. DeAndre took a slow, arrogant sip of his expensive bourbon and smirked. "Keep watching your game, son," DeAndre said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your mother grew up on food stamps in a neighborhood where people eat on paper plates in front of the television. Let the boy relax." Camille let out a sharp, mocking laugh from across the table. She adjusted her diamond necklace and looked me up and down with blatant disgust. "Honestly," Simone, Camille chimed in, leaning forward, "it is embarrassing how you try to force your poverty mindset onto the boy. Look at that cheap off-the-rack suit you are wearing to Sunday dinner." I kept my hands folded in my lap. I was used to their coordinated attacks. They thrived on isolating me, constantly reminding me that I was an outsider who had somehow infiltrated their pristine bloodline. But what happened next crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Encouraged by the laughter and validation of his father, his grandmother, and his aunt, Jalen stood up from his chair. The boy I had carried, birthed, and loved with every fiber of my being looked at me with genuine hatred. "You are just a broke leech," Jalen screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Before I could even process his words, Jalen reached across the corner of the table and swung his arm. The slap landed hard across my left cheek. The physical pain was sharp, but the emotional devastation of realizing my own child had been completely weaponized against me was paralyzing. I turned my head to look at the adults at the table, waiting for anyone to reprimand the child for striking his mother. DeAndre merely swirled the ice in his bourbon glass, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Camille hid a giggle behind her hand. She did not look at her grandson. She looked directly into my eyes, her expression devoid of any human empathy. "When you bring a single dime of real value into this legacy family, Simone, maybe the boy will actually respect you," Corinne said, her tone smooth and lethal. "Until then, do not expect him to treat you like anything more than the hired help. You are lucky we even allow you to sit at this table." This was how they operated. For 10 years, they had systematically dismantled my authority as a mother, buying Jalen's loyalty with exorbitant gifts and poisoning his mind with elitist rhetoric. Instead of breaking down, I took a deep, steadying breath. I reached up and slowly wiped my cheek where a red mark was already beginning to form. I felt no urge to cry. The last drop of warmth I held for this family evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating void. I looked at Jalen, who was now standing there slightly breathless, waiting for my reaction. I forced the corners of my mouth to curve upward into a warm, gentle smile. My eyes were entirely dead, completely empty of the motherly affection he had just rejected. "It is okay, baby," I said, my voice soft and eerily calm. "I know you are just stressed from school. Tomorrow I will personally make your absolute favorite lobster mac and cheese and bring it to school for your lunch." I finished my glass of water, excused myself from the table with perfect manners, and walked up the grand staircase to my home office. I locked the heavy oak door behind me. I did not shed a single tear. For a mother, a shattered heart does not simply bleed, it calculates. I sat down at my desk and opened my personal laptop. As a forensic accountant, my specialty is digging through digital dirt to find the bodies corporate criminals try to bury. DeAndre thought I was just a glorified bookkeeper who did not understand his complex real estate investments. He had absolutely no idea that for the past 6 months, I had been quietly mirroring his hard drives, mapping out the entire fraudulent financial structure of the Davenport Legacy Trust. I picked up my phone and dialed Jordan Baxter, my best friend from college, and currently the most ruthless corporate litigator in Atlanta. I did not bother with pleasantries when she answered. "Jordan, it is time," I said, my voice steady. "Execute phase 1 of the asset acquisition. I want the holding company locked down by tomorrow morning." "Consider it done," Jordan replied instantly, sensing the absolute finality in my tone. "Are you okay, Simone?" "I am perfect," I said before ending the call. I walked over to the large bookshelf at the back of my office, pressed a hidden release latch, and opened a concealed wall safe. Inside sat a stack of external hard drives and a very specific item I had ordered weeks ago. It was a customized insulated lunchbox. But it was far from ordinary. I carried the lunchbox to my desk and carefully unscrewed the false bottom. With surgical precision, I installed an ultra-thin waterproof tablet into the concealed compartment. I connected the device to my laptop, synchronizing it with a specific high-definition video file I had extracted from the Davenport home security system just moments ago. I configured the tablet's wireless settings to auto-broadcast the moment the lunchbox lid was fully opened, maximizing the volume output settings to ensure maximum impact. I sealed the false bottom back into place, running my hand over the smooth plastic casing. The trap was perfectly set. The next morning, the sun rose over Atlanta, casting a warm glow over the sprawling Davenport estate. I was in the kitchen early, meticulously preparing the lobster mac and cheese, just as I had promised. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop. It was a text message from DeAndre. "Do not bother showing up to the charity gala at the hotel today. You are a public embarrassment and Corinne wants you nowhere near the donors. Stay home." I simply set the phone down on the counter, scooped the mac and cheese into the top tray of the lunchbox, and snapped the heavy lid tightly shut. I picked up my phone, unlocking the home screen, and calmly typed out a single simple text reply directly to my arrogant husband. "No worries at all, DeAndre. Enjoy your morning. I am busy bringing a very special lunch for Jalen today." The next day, the midday sun beat down on the meticulously manicured lawns of Jalen's prestigious prep school. Tuition here was $40,000 a year, and it showed. Luxury SUVs idled in the pickup line, while affluent mothers in designer activewear clustered in small groups sipping organic matcha lattes and comparing their children's Ivy League prospects. This was a world carefully curated by money, status, and exclusion. I pulled my sedan into the parking lot, stepping out with Jalen's customized lunchbox firmly in hand. I smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored yet remarkably unpretentious blouse, bracing myself for the inevitable hostility. I spotted them almost immediately. My mother Elaine and my sister Charmaine were already stationed near the main administrative building. They had clearly planned to pick Jalen up early for some extravagant shopping trip, Another calculated attempt to isolate him from me and buy his loyalty with things I allegedly could not provide. Charmaine spotted me first. She tapped Elaine on the arm, pointing a manicured finger in my direction. They both turned their faces, settling into identical expressions of haughty disbelief. They truly believed they held all the power. They truly believed I was arriving to grovel to desperately deliver a homemade lunch in a pathetic attempt to win back the affection of a son they had successfully poisoned against me. Naomi Elaine called out, her voice loud enough to carry across the courtyard, ensuring the other elite mothers could hear every word. I am genuinely surprised to see you here. I thought you would be too embarrassed to show your face after yesterday's little episode. I walked steadily toward them, my posture straight, my expression an unreadable mask of polite composure. I promised Jalen his favorite lunch, I said evenly. I always keep my promises, Mother. Charmaine let out a short, dismissive laugh, stepping forward to block my path. She eyed the lunchbox with theatrical disgust. Please, Charmaine drawled, her voice dripping with venom. Do not bring your greasy working-class food to taint this campus, Naomi. We were just about to sign Jalen out early to take him to that new artisanal bistro downtown. The boy needs refinement, not whatever tragic poverty-stricken meal you cobbled together in your sad little kitchen. Several mothers nearby paused their conversations, subtly turning their heads to watch the drama unfold. This was exactly what Charmaine wanted, a public spectacle where she could assert her perceived dominance and humiliate me in front of her high society peers. Instead of flinching, retreating, or apologizing, I simply smiled. It was the same dead, calculating smile I had given Jalen the night before. I did not look at Charmaine. Instead, I turned my attention slightly to the left, where the school's billing administrator, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Higgins, happened to be standing near the entrance holding a clipboard. Mrs. Higgins, I called out, my voice clear and carrying perfectly across the quiet courtyard. Could I have a brief moment of your time? Mrs. Higgins stepped forward, adjusting her glasses. Yes, Mrs. Davenport. How can I assist you? I pulled a sleek silver pen from my purse. By the way, I need you to immediately cancel my guarantor authorization on Charmaine's credit card for her son's tuition, I stated loudly. The courtyard went deathly quiet. Charmaine's smug expression instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. The other mothers, who had been pretending not to listen, now openly stared. Naomi, what are you doing? Charmaine hissed, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. Stop it right now. I ignored her completely, keeping my eyes fixed entirely on Mrs. Higgins. You see, Mrs. Higgins, Charmaine's black card has been declining for 3 consecutive months. I have been quietly covering the shortfall to avoid a disruption in my nephew's education. However, I am no longer willing to subsidize her fraudulent lifestyle. I suggest you seek immediate alternative payment arrangements before the semester ends. Mrs. Higgins blinked, clearly uncomfortable but professionally bound to acknowledge the request. I understand, Mrs. Davenport. I will update the billing records immediately. I turned back to my sister. The color had completely drained from her face. She looked visibly ill, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. The elite mothers, women who prided themselves on financial superiority, were now whispering behind their hands, casting judgmental glances at Charmaine. How much longer are you going to hide your impending bankruptcy from your husband? Charmaine, I asked, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. How much longer can you pretend you are a wealthy socialite when you are secretly drowning in debt, desperately funneling money from his accounts to fund your pathetic, shallow existence? Elaine grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. Have you lost your mind? Elaine snarled, her voice shaking with rage. You are ruining your sister's reputation. You are destroying this family's good name. I calmly reached down and pried her fingers off my arm one by one. I am simply cleaning house, Mother, I replied coldly, and I am far from finished. Before Elaine could utter another word, the heavy double doors of the main building swung open. The afternoon bell had rung, and a flood of students poured out into the courtyard. Jalen emerged near the front of the pack, his expensive uniform slightly rumpled. He scanned the crowd and immediately spotted Elaine and Charmaine. His face lit up with a huge smile. He ran straight toward them, completely ignoring my presence just as he had been conditioned to do. Grandma Auntie Charmaine, Jalen yelled, rushing past me to throw his arms around Elaine's waist. Did you come to take me shopping? Dad said you were going to buy me that new gaming console. Elaine forced a strained smile, patting his head, while casting a venomous glare in my direction. Yes, sweetheart. We are going to have a wonderful afternoon. Just the three of us. I stepped smoothly into his path, cutting off his route to Charmaine. I held the customized lunchbox out, forcing it directly into his hands. The heavy container landed in his grasp with a solid thud. I kept my promise, Jalen. I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the schoolyard. It was a chilling sound stripped of any maternal warmth, ringing with absolute terrifying authority. Open it right now. Eat up. Jalen looked up at me, clearly confused by my tone. The defiant smirk he usually wore when backed by his grandmother faltered slightly. He looked down at the lunchbox, then back at me. I do not want your stupid food, Jalen sneered, trying to shove the box back toward me. I am going to a real restaurant with Grandma. I did not take the box. I stepped closer, my presence suddenly overwhelming, casting a long shadow over him. I said, open it. I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that only he, Elaine, and Charmaine could hear. Open it, Jalen, or I promise you, you will never see another video game, another allowance, or another private school campus for the rest of your life. Open the box. Jalen froze. He had never seen me like this. He was used to the pushover, the woman who absorbed insults and cried quietly in her room. He was completely unprepared for the cold, calculating stranger standing before him. Intimidated by the sheer intensity in my eyes, his small hands fumbled with the metal latches on the sides of the lunchbox. Elaine stepped forward, trying to intervene. Stop terrorizing the boy, Naomi, she demanded, reaching for the box. Do not touch it, I snapped, shooting her a glare so fierce she actually recoiled. This is between me and my son. Jalen finally popped the latches open. He lifted the heavy lid. A rich, savory aroma of lobster and melted cheese instantly filled the air. The top tray was filled perfectly with his favorite meal, still steaming slightly. He looked confused, expecting something terrible. It is just macaroni, Jalen mumbled, looking at me with a mixture of relief and lingering defiance. Lift the food tray, Jalen, I instructed calmly. He hesitated, then reached in and lifted the plastic container holding the food. Beneath it, nestled perfectly in the customized false bottom, was the ultra-thin waterproof tablet. Its screen was dark, but the moment the tray was removed, the pressure sensor I had carefully installed was triggered. The tablet screen instantly flared to life, glowing brightly in the afternoon sun. The automated sequence initiated immediately. A small blue icon flashed on the screen, indicating a successful Bluetooth connection had been established. Less than 20 feet away, Corinne's massive luxury SUV was parked in the VIP loading zone. I had secretly paired the tablet with her vehicle's advanced entertainment system weeks ago during a family gathering. The SUV boasted a state-of-the-art surround sound audio system designed to project crystal-clear sound. The tablet began to play the high-definition video file. At first, there was only a low, muffled sound like someone adjusting a microphone. Jalen stared at the screen, his brow furrowed in confusion. Charmaine craned her neck, trying to see what was on the device. Elaine simply looked annoyed, impatient for this bizarre interaction to end. Then the audio erupted from the SUV's exterior speakers, booming across the entire prep school courtyard with deafening clarity. It was DeAndre's voice. I am so sick of that brat, Jalen! The voice echoed, bouncing off the brick walls of the academic buildings. Jalen gasped, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he recognized his father's voice. The video on the tablet screen was sharp and unmistakable. It was footage from the hidden security camera in DeAndre's private home office. The camera he thought he had disabled, but which I had remotely reactivated months ago. The footage showed DeAndre sitting in his leather chair, a glass of bourbon in his hand. But he was not alone. Sitting across his lap, her arms wrapped intimately around his neck, was Charmaine. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the meticulously manicured lawns of Jalen's prestigious Buckhead Prep School. Tuition at this exclusive academy ran a staggering $40,000 a year, and every single inch of the sprawling campus reflected that exorbitant price tag. A long line of luxury SUVs idled smoothly in the pickup lane, their tinted windows hiding the city's most affluent residents. Outside the vehicles, groups of impeccably dressed black mothers clustered together. They wore the latest designer activewear, sipping organic matcha lattes while casually exchanging subtle boasts about their children's Ivy League prospects and their husbands' recent corporate acquisitions. This was a superficial world carefully curated by money status and ruthless exclusion. I pulled my practical, unassuming sedan into the visitor parking lot, stepping out into the humid Georgia air, with Jalen's customized insulated lunchbox gripped firmly in my right hand. I smoothed the minor wrinkles from my tailored yet remarkably unpretentious blouse. I took a deep, centering breath, bracing my mind and spirit for the inevitable hostility I was about to face. I spotted them almost immediately. My mother Elaine and my sister Charmaine were already stationed near the heavy glass doors of the main administrative building. They had clearly coordinated this ambush. They planned to pick Jalen up early for some extravagant shopping spree, which was just another calculated attempt to isolate my son from me and buy his unwavering loyalty with material things I allegedly could not provide. Charmaine spotted my arrival first. She tapped Elaine forcefully on the arm and pointed a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. They both turned in unison, their faces quickly settling into identical expressions of haughty disbelief and deep disgust. They truly believed they held all the power in this dynamic. They genuinely believed I was arriving to grovel, to desperately deliver a homemade lunch in a pathetic, transparent attempt to win back the affection of a son they had successfully poisoned against his own mother. Naomi Elaine called out, her voice intentionally loud enough to carry across the quiet courtyard, ensuring the other elite mothers could hear every single venomous word. "I am genuinely surprised to see you here today. I thought you would be far too embarrassed to show your face in public after yesterday's tragic little episode at the dinner table. It takes a remarkable lack of self-awareness to parade around here." I walked steadily toward them. My posture was perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of polite composure. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. "I promised Jalen his favorite lunch," I said evenly, coming to a halt a few feet away from them. "I always keep my promises, Mother." Charmaine let out a short, harsh, dismissive laugh, stepping forward to physically block my path to the school doors. She eyed the customized lunchbox with theatrical revulsion, wrinkling her nose as if it carried a highly contagious disease. "Please," Charmaine drawled, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "Do not bring your greasy, working-class food to taint this beautiful campus, Naomi. We were just about to sign Jalen out early to take him to that new artisanal bistro downtown. The boy needs cultural refinement, not whatever tragic poverty-stricken meal you cobbled together in your sad little kitchen. Your domestic efforts are truly pathetic." Several of the elite mothers standing nearby paused their hushed conversations, subtly turning their heads and adjusting their designer sunglasses to watch the family drama unfold. This was exactly what Charmaine wanted. She thrived on creating a public spectacle where she could assert her perceived social dominance and humiliate me in front of her high society peers. She wanted to remind everyone that despite my marriage to DeAndre, I would always be the poor girl who did not belong in their magnificent, untouchable circle of generational wealth. Instead of flinching, retreating, or offering a stammering apology, I simply smiled. It was the exact same dead, calculating smile I had given Jalen the night before. I did not look at Charmaine. Instead, I turned my attention slightly to the left, where the school's senior billing administrator, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Higgins, happened to be standing near the entrance doors, holding a thick clipboard and monitoring the student release protocols. "Mrs. Higgins." I called out, my voice clear, sharp, and carrying perfectly across the quiet, sunlit courtyard. "Could I possibly have a brief moment of your valuable time?" Mrs. Higgins stepped forward, adjusting her silver-rimmed glasses with a professional nod. "Yes, Mrs. Davenport. How can I properly assist you this afternoon?" I pulled a sleek silver fountain pen from my leather purse and held it up for everyone to see. "By the way, I need you to immediately cancel my guarantor authorization on Charmaine's credit card for her son's tuition, I stated loudly, making absolutely sure every syllable was articulated with maximum precision. The courtyard went deathly quiet. Charmaine's smug, triumphant expression instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. The other wealthy mothers who had been pretending not to listen just moments before now openly stopped and stared directly at us. Naomi, what on earth are you doing? Charmaine hissed, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a frantic, desperate whisper. Stop it right now before you completely ruin everything. I ignored her completely, keeping my eyes fixed entirely on the billing administrator. You see, Mrs. Higgins, Charmaine's exclusive black card has been declining for 3 consecutive months due to insufficient funds. I have been quietly covering the massive financial shortfall out of my own pocket to avoid a severe disruption in my nephew's private education. However, I am no longer willing to subsidize her fraudulent counterfeit lifestyle. I strongly suggest you seek immediate alternative payment arrangements from her before the current semester ends next week. Mrs. Higgins blinked clearly, uncomfortable being dragged into a public family dispute, but professionally bound to acknowledge the serious financial request regarding a student's standing. I understand completely. Mrs. Davenport, she replied stiffly, clutching her clipboard tighter. I will update the billing records and remove your guarantor status immediately. I turned back to my sister. The warm, healthy color had completely drained from her face. She looked visibly ill, her carefully constructed facade of boundless wealth and privilege crumbling into dust in real time. The elite mother's women who fiercely prided themselves on their financial superiority and flawless credit scores were now whispering viciously behind their manicured hands, casting deeply judgmental and disgusted glances at Charmaine. In their ruthless world, being exposed as secretly broke was the ultimate unforgivable sin. How much longer are you going to hide your impending bankruptcy from your husband, Charmaine? I asked, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity in the sudden heavy silence. How much longer can you pretend you are a wealthy, untouchable socialite when you are secretly drowning in insurmountable debt, desperately funneling stolen money from his retirement accounts to fund your pathetic, shallow, entirely empty existence? You are nothing but an absolute fraud. Elaine lunged forward and grabbed my arm, her sharp acrylic nails digging painfully into my skin through the fabric of my blouse. Have you completely lost your mind? Elaine snarled, her voice shaking with uncontrollable rage. You are ruining your sister's impeccable reputation. You are destroying this family's good name in front of everyone who matters in this entire city. I calmly reached down and pried her fingers off my arm, removing them one by one with deliberate, methodical force. I am simply cleaning house, Mother, I replied coldly, smoothing my sleeve to erase the memory of her touch. And I assure you I am far from finished with either of you. Before Elaine could utter another furious word, the heavy double doors of the main administrative building swung open with a loud, resounding click. The afternoon dismissal bell had rung, and a massive flood of uniformed students poured out into the sunlit courtyard. I scanned the chaotic sea of navy blazers and crisp plaid skirts. Jalen emerged near the front of the pack, his expensive uniform slightly rumpled from the day's athletic activities. He scanned the waiting crowd of parents and immediately spotted Elaine and Charmaine standing proudly near the loading zone. His face lit up with a huge, genuine smile. He ran straight toward them, completely ignoring my presence, just as he had been heavily conditioned to do by his father and grandmother over the past 9 years of his young, privileged life. Grandma, Auntie Charmaine, Jalen yelled, rushing past me to throw his arms tightly around Elaine's waist. Did you come to take me shopping today? Dad said you were going to buy me that brand new virtual reality gaming console I asked for last week. Elaine forced a strained, tight smile, patting his head affectionately, while simultaneously casting a venomous, hateful glare in my direction over his shoulder. Yes, sweetheart. We are going to have a wonderful, fun-filled afternoon. Just the 3 of us, far away from all this unnecessary negativity and unbelievable disrespect. I stepped smoothly and decisively into his path, physically cutting off his route to Charmaine's waiting luxury vehicle. I held the customized heavy lunchbox out, forcing it directly into his hands before he could pull away. The container landed in his small grasp with a solid, undeniable thud. I kept my promise, Jalen, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the ambient noise of the bustling schoolyard. It was a chilling sound entirely stripped of any maternal warmth, ringing with absolute terrifying authority. Open it right now. Eat up. Section 4, 1500 words. That same evening, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Atlanta was completely transformed into a gilded sanctuary of desperate denial. The Davenports were hosting their highly anticipated annual High Society Charity Gala, an event that traditionally served as a glittering, impenetrable monument to their untouchable status within the Black elite. The room dripped in excessive opulence. Massive floral arrangements of rare white orchids cascaded down from towering crystal centerpieces, while waitstaff in immaculate white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage champagne. Tonight, however, the heavy atmosphere was thick with frantic, thinly veiled panic. From the exact moment the valets took the keys of the arriving luxury vehicles, the whispers among the affluent guests were absolutely deafening. Everyone present had seen the high-definition video broadcasted from the prep school courtyard. Everyone had heard DeAndre and Camille. DeAndre and Corinne had immediately mobilized their extremely expensive aggressive public relations team. They deployed a rapid-fire crisis management strategy, circulating a ridiculous fabricated narrative to every major donor, megachurch pastor, and socialite in the room. The official story they were desperately peddling over expensive champagne was that the highly damaging video was nothing more than a malicious AI deepfake. They claimed it was a highly sophisticated cyber attack manufactured by a disgruntled former employee looking to extort the prestigious Davenport Legacy Trust. They smiled through tightly gritted teeth, clinking crystal glasses and assuring their wealthy peers that federal authorities were already handling the digital forgery. I was, of course, explicitly and aggressively uninvited. DeAndre had made absolutely sure to revoke my access credentials and strictly instructed the event coordinators to bar me from the premises entirely. He vastly underestimated my professional reach and my personal resources. I stepped out of my sleek black town car and glided toward the grand double doors of the ballroom. I was not wearing the modest off-the-rack clothing they constantly ridiculed to diminish my self-worth. I wore a breathtaking custom-made crimson gown that clung to my curves with flawless architectural precision. The luxurious silk fabric caught the ambient light with every single step, radiating absolute power, fierce independence, and undeniable authority. As I walked confidently through the heavy oak doors and into the dazzling light of the grand ballroom, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The live string quartet situated on an elevated stage seemed to miss a collective beat. Elite conversations regarding stock portfolios and summer homes died mid-sentence. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward the entrance, completely captivated by my arrival. I completely eclipsed Camille, who was standing near a massive ice sculpture, looking utterly haggard, terrified, and defeated. She was wearing an overly embellished silver designer dress that suddenly looked incredibly cheap and desperate under the intense, shifting scrutiny of the crowd. The wealthy guests parted like the Red Sea as I made my deliberate way toward the exact center of the expansive room. DeAndre spotted my arrival from across the polished marble dance floor. The fake charming smile he had been offering a prominent city councilman instantly vanished, replaced by a mask of raw, unadulterated fury. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see a thick vein pulsing violently in his temple. He immediately abandoned his crucial networking conversation and marched directly toward me with heavy, aggressive strides. He snapped his fingers aggressively, signaling the two burly suited security guards stationed near the main reception table. He clearly intended to make a brutal, highly public spectacle of my physical removal to reassert his dominance over the room. He stepped aggressively into my personal space, attempting to use his towering physical size and imposing presence to intimidate me into immediate submission, a tactic he had successfully used behind closed doors for years. "What the hell are you doing here, Naomi?" DeAndre hissed, his voice a lethal, vibrating whisper carefully designed not to alert the prominent guests standing just a few feet away. "I specifically told you to stay away from this gala. You have caused enough catastrophic damage today with your pathetic fabricated video stunt. You are trespassing on private property, and I will absolutely not allow you to ruin this night or this family's pristine reputation." He reached out quickly, his large, heavy hand aiming directly for my upper arm to physically drag me toward the nearest exit doors. For a decade, I would have cowered. I would have lowered my eyes and allowed him to pull me into the shadows to avoid a public scene. Not tonight. I did not shrink away or cower in fear. I swiftly swatted DeAndre's hand away with a sharp, forceful strike that echoed audibly over the ambient noise of the stunned ballroom. He recoiled in sheer shock, aggressively rubbing his stinging wrist, completely bewildered by my physical defiance. Before he could recover his arrogant composure, I reached into my elegant evening clutch and pulled out a freshly printed, heavily stamped financial document. I tossed the catering and venue invoice squarely onto the sleek mirrored surface of the reception table. "Security works for whoever pays them. DeAndre." I stated, my voice ringing out with terrifying clarity, completely slicing through the remaining murmurs in the opulent room. "Your exclusive platinum card bounced exactly an hour ago because your primary accounts are entirely frozen. I just paid the $250,000 bill to keep the lights on in this ballroom. I am your host tonight." DeAndre stared at the detailed invoice, the warm, healthy color completely draining from his handsome face. The two security guards who had rapidly moved in to flank me stopped dead in their tracks. They glanced down at the officially stamped invoice bearing my name as the sole financial guarantor of the evening's extravagant festivities. They immediately stepped back, folding their large hands behind their backs, adopting a strictly neutral stance. They were paid professionals, not personal thugs, and I was the one exclusively signing their hefty paychecks tonight. DeAndre looked around wildly, suddenly realizing his ultimate authority had just been financially severed. He had spent his entire privileged life wielding vast amounts of generational wealth as an inescapable weapon, and now he found himself entirely unarmed on his own carefully constructed battlefield. The wealthy donors standing nearby exchanged stunned, deeply bewildered glances. The convenient AI deepfake excuse was rapidly dissolving before their very eyes. A supposedly powerful, wealthy CEO whose limitless corporate credit cards were publicly declining could not possibly be the innocent victim of a simple cyber prank. I was a man in terrifying, uncontrollable freefall, and everyone in the room could finally see it. Corinne, noticing the sudden commotion and the drastic, chilling shift in the room's energy, stomped over. Her heavy, wildly expensive designer jewelry clattered noisily against her chest as she moved with frantic, aggressive purpose. She pushed ruthlessly past a group of gaping, highly influential real estate investors, her face contorted into a mask of ugly, desperate rage. She looked at DeAndre's pale, defeated face, then down at the fully paid invoice, resting on the mirrored table, and finally at me. Her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Arrest her right now!" Corinne screamed, her shrill voice shattering the absolute last remnants of high society decorum. She pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger directly at my face, completely abandoning all her carefully cultivated elegance and poise. "She is a criminal. She hacked our highly secure corporate systems. She must have stolen that money directly from the Davenport Legacy Trust accounts. A mere accountant, a girl from the absolute slums, could not possibly have $250,000 lying around to pay for a charity gala. Arrest her for grand theft immediately." I maintained my absolute icy composure. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical, undignified shrieking. I did not need to scream to command the room. I possessed something far more powerful than sheer volume. I possessed the undeniable truth. Instead of shouting back, I slowly reached back into my clutch and retrieved a thick, heavily tabbed folder bearing the official, undeniable seal of my independent forensic auditing firm. I held up the forensic audit file so the glaring lights of the massive crystal chandeliers illuminated the undeniable mathematical proof of their extensive, unforgivable corporate crimes. "I didn't steal it, Corinne," I said, my voice carrying a lethal, unwavering calm that instantly commanded the absolute attention of every single VIP guest in the grand ballroom. "But speaking of theft, do these VIP guests know you bought Camille's secret Miami condo, using the scholarship funds meant for underprivileged Black youth?" Corinne stood absolutely paralyzed. Her mouth opened and closed in rapid, jerky movements, completely unable to formulate a single coherent syllable of denial. The immensely wealthy donors surrounding her physically stepped back in unison, treating the former sorority president as if she had suddenly become highly contagious. Stealing from the local community to fund a secret luxurious real estate asset for her son's mistress was a monumental sin that even the forgiving image-obsessed Atlanta elite could not simply sweep under the rug. The massive crystal chandeliers above us seemed to cast a significantly harsher, more unforgiving light on her heavily contoured face. Before Corinne could even attempt to construct a plausible lie, the heavy gilded doors at the far end of the ballroom flew open with a violent, resounding crash that echoed sharply off the vaulted ceilings. Every single head in the opulent room snapped toward the grand entrance. Darius marched through the threshold. He was still wearing his impeccably tailored commercial pilot uniform, though his tie was aggressively loosened and his jaw was set in a rigid, terrifying line of absolute, uncompromising fury. He had clearly chartered a private jet out of London the exact second my scheduled high-definition video file hit his personal inbox. His heavy footsteps echoed like gunshots against the polished marble floor as he moved with singular destructive purpose. In his right hand, he clutched a thick, legally binding stack of documents, divorce papers. The sheer terror that instantly washed over Camille's face was a masterpiece of human panic. She let out a guttural, terrifying wail that completely shattered the remaining silence of the charity gala. She collapsed hard to her knees, her heavily embellished silver designer gown pooling awkwardly around her on the cold marble floor. The confident, arrogant lifestyle influencer, who had spent years mocking my modest wardrobe, was now reduced to a groveling, pathetic mess in front of the city's most influential figures. Darius. Camille shrieked, her voice cracking with raw desperation. She began to crawl toward him, fat tears streaming rapidly down her cheeks, leaving dark, ugly trails of ruined mascara across her perfectly powdered face. "Please, you have to listen to me. It is not what it looks like. He forced me. DeAndre manipulated me into doing it. I was scared of him." She reached out desperately, attempting to grasp the sharp crease of Darius's uniform trousers, playing the ultimate helpless victim. She pointed a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my husband, who was currently frozen in place, utterly failing to process the rapid, consecutive destruction of his entire carefully constructed universe. "He told me he would ruin me if I did not cooperate." Camille sobbed loudly, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "You know how powerful he is, Darius. You know how Corinne protects him. I had no choice. I love you. I only love you. Please do not do this to our marriage." Darius looked down at his weeping wife with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. He did not reach down to help her up. He did not offer a single word of comfort. He simply held the divorce papers tightly in his fist, his knuckles turning entirely white from the intense pressure. I decided it was time to serve the final lethal course of my meticulously planned revenge. I stepped smoothly forward, bypassing the shocked security guards and the whispering donors. I walked directly toward the shattered couple, my crimson custom gown gliding effortlessly across the floor. I stopped right beside Camille's trembling form and looked directly into Darius's furious, heartbroken eyes. I reached into my clutch one final time. "She was not manipulated, Darius." I stated, my voice cutting through Camille's pathetic, echoing sobs with clinical precision. I smoothly handed Darius a thick, heavily tabbed folder, entirely separate from the one I had just used to completely decimate Corinne. This specific folder contained the absolute darkest financial secrets of the Davenport family, the ones they thought they had buried under layers of complex digital encryption. I opened the cover for him, pointing directly to the highlighted financial statements on the very first page. "Here are the certified wire transfers proving exactly what your loving wife has been doing while you were busy flying international routes to provide for her lavish lifestyle," I explained calmly, ensuring my voice carried to the eager listening ears of the surrounding elite crowd. "Camille did not just betray your marriage vows in DeAndre's study. She deliberately and systematically drained your personal private retirement accounts over the past 18 months. Darius's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, as he stared down at the undeniable mathematical proof of his total financial ruin. His hands began to shake slightly as he flipped through the highly detailed banking records I had provided. She funneled every single cent of your hard-earned savings directly into a series of offshore shell companies. I continued relentlessly, showing absolutely no mercy to the sobbing woman at my feet. Those shell companies were explicitly set up to fund DeAndre's highly speculative, entirely failed cryptocurrency investments. DeAndre bankrupted the primary family trust 2 years ago. He was desperately trying to recoup the massive losses before Corinne or the board of directors found out. Camille willingly stole your entire future to finance his pathetic, reckless gambling. Camille let out another sharp, highly pitched scream, burying her face completely in her hands. She knew it was over. There was no spinning wire fraud. There was no blaming a deepfake for certified banking records featuring her own authorized digital signatures. Darius slowly lifted his gaze from the damning documents. The profound heartbreak in his eyes instantly morphed into a dangerous, blinding rage. He looked past me, his furious gaze locking squarely onto his younger brother. DeAndre stood a few feet away, his chest heaving, his arrogant facade completely obliterated. He had spent his entire life being protected by Corinne, shielded from every consequence, praised as the golden child of the Davenport legacy. Now exposed as a bankrupt fraud, an embezzler, and a traitor to his own blood, he had absolutely nowhere left to hide. "You stole my future!" Darius roared, his deep voice shaking the crystal glasses on the nearby cocktail tables. "You slept with my wife in our grandfather's study, and you stole everything I worked for." DeAndre backed into a completely inescapable corner and, driven by the sheer desperate panic of a cornered animal, made the worst possible decision of his entire privileged life. Instead of apologizing, instead of showing a single ounce of genuine remorse, his fragile, toxic ego completely snapped. "You were always a weak, pathetic loser, Darius." DeAndre spat back, puffing out his chest in a desperate, foolish attempt to assert dominance. "You were never smart enough to run this empire. You deserve to lose it all." Blinded by an entirely justified explosive rage, Darius did not hesitate. He dropped the heavy folder of financial evidence and launched himself violently forward. DeAndre barely had time to raise his hands before Darius tackled him squarely in the chest. The sheer force of the impact sent both men crashing backward into the massive, meticulously carved ice sculpture. The beautiful, glowing centerpiece shattered instantly into 1,000 jagged pieces, sending freezing water and sharp shards of ice exploding across the polished marble dance floor. The high society crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. Wealthy socialites shrieked and scrambled backward, desperately trying to protect their designer gowns from the flying debris. Prominent city officials and influential megachurch pastors shouted for security, watching in total, unadulterated horror as the two elite brothers engaged in a bloody, deeply humiliating fistfight right in the center of the grand ballroom. DeAndre threw a wild, desperate punch that caught Darius on the jaw. But Darius, fueled by the agonizing adrenaline of ultimate betrayal, retaliated with a brutal, calculating right hook that snapped DeAndre's head back violently. Blood immediately spurted from DeAndre's nose, staining the pristine white collar of his wildly expensive tuxedo. They rolled across the wet, slippery marble, tearing at each other's clothing, destroying the immaculate, highly manicured image of the perfect Davenport legacy family forever. Corinne stood frozen on the sidelines, clutching her chest, her face a mask of pure, inescapable agony as she watched her two sons literally tear their empire apart with their bare hands. Her desperate, lifelong mission to maintain a flawless public image was entirely dead, bleeding out onto the floor of the St. Regis Hotel in front of everyone who mattered in Atlanta. The security guards, previously neutralized by my financial takeover, finally rushed forward, struggling immensely to separate the two furious, bloody men. The chaotic scene was a symphony of destruction, a beautiful, violent culmination of years of toxic lies, hidden abuse, and unchecked arrogance, finally meeting their absolute, unavoidable end. I stepped smoothly backward, safely out of range of the splashing water and flying fists. I walked gracefully over to a nearby abandoned cocktail table. I picked up a perfectly chilled, untouched flute of vintage champagne. I took a slow, elegant sip of the sparkling wine, relishing the crisp, sweet taste on my tongue. I stood there in my breathtaking crimson gown, watching the chaotic, bloody destruction of the people who had dared to teach my son to strike me. They had thought I was weak. They had assumed my silence was submission. They had wildly underestimated the terrifying, unstoppable wrath of a mother pushed past her breaking point. I smiled, feeling a profound, untouchable sense of peace wash over my entire being. The revenge was absolute, the execution was flawless, and the empire was officially burned to the very ground. DeAndre, his expensive tuxedo, now completely ruined blood, actively pouring from his broken nose and soaking into his crisp white shirt, scrambled backward. He was utterly desperate, a drowning man flailing wildly for a lifeline that no longer existed. He scrambled across the slippery marble, knocking over an abandoned tray of crystal champagne flutes that shattered loudly around him. The elite crowd recoiled further, entirely repulsed by the sight of the former golden boy, reduced to a pathetic bleeding mess. He managed to grab a microphone from a nearby audio technician who had been too shocked to intervene. DeAndre hauled himself up onto the edge of the elevated stage where the string quartet had been playing. The musicians had long since fled, leaving behind their expensive instruments. He clutched the microphone tightly, his knuckles white, his chest heaving with exertion and pure, unadulterated panic. He was determined to play the victim, leaning into the only strategy he had left: aggressive, loud denial. "Listen to me!" DeAndre roared into the microphone, his amplified voice booming across the grand ballroom, distorted by panic and the sharp pain of his shattered nose. The feedback shrieked momentarily, causing several wealthy guests to wince and cover their ears. "Do not listen to a single word she says," DeAndre shouted, pointing a shaking, blood-stained finger directly at me. I stood calmly by the cocktail table, my crimson gown completely unblemished, sipping my champagne. "She hacked my company," DeAndre continued to yell, spinning a frantic, entirely fabricated narrative. "She is the one embezzling funds from the Davenport Legacy Trust. She manipulated the data to frame my mother. She used her position as an accountant to create those fake wire transfers. I discovered her massive theft 2 days ago, and she is trying to destroy me before I can expose her." The room murmured, uncertain. Some of the older, more conservative donors, individuals who had done lucrative business with the Davenport family for decades, looked momentarily conflicted. DeAndre was counting on their deeply ingrained misogyny and their inherent bias against my working-class background to sway their judgment. "I called the police on her an hour ago," DeAndre announced triumphantly, a grotesque, bloody smirk spreading across his face. "They are on their way right now. You are going to federal prison, you ghetto trash. You thought you could steal from us and get away with it. You are nothing but a common criminal." As if on cue, the faint, high-pitched wail of approaching sirens could be heard through the heavy, soundproofed walls of the St. Regis Hotel. The sound grew rapidly louder, a cacophony of emergency vehicles converging directly on our location. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect off the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand ballroom, casting frantic, colorful shadows across the frightened faces of the high society guests. DeAndre's smirk widened. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed his hasty, desperate phone call to the local precinct, claiming a deranged former employee was causing a disturbance, had secured his ultimate victory. He believed he was still untouchable. I slowly lowered my champagne flute, placing it carefully onto the glass surface of the cocktail table with a soft, deliberate click. I did not flinch as the sirens reached a deafening crescendo outside the hotel doors. I did not look toward the exits. I simply looked up at DeAndre standing on the stage, bleeding and profoundly delusional. "You called the local police," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the rising panic in the room, cutting through his amplified accusations. "That's cute, DeAndre. It really is. A very valiant last-ditch effort to save your crumbling empire." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, my custom crimson gown flowing flawlessly around me. The crowd parted further, giving me a wide berth. "Because I called the FBI 6 months ago." I stated the absolute certainty in my tone, silencing every remaining whisper in the ballroom. DeAndre's bloody smirk instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, uncomprehending horror. Corinne, who was still leaning heavily against a nearby table, let out a choked gasp, clutching her designer pearls so tightly the strand threatened to snap. The heavy gilded double doors of the grand ballroom did not just open, they were forcefully, aggressively thrown wide. The polite uniformed hotel security team was violently shoved aside. A massive coordinated squad of federal agents stormed into the opulent room. They were not local beat cops responding to a simple disturbance call. They were highly trained federal investigators wearing dark utilitarian windbreakers with bright stark yellow letters spelling out FBI across their backs. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, fanning out rapidly to secure all exits and establish immediate control over the chaotic scene. The high society crowd, previously murmuring with morbid curiosity, now descended into total paralyzed silence. Prominent city officials physically recoiled desperately, trying to distance themselves from the impending federal raid. Influential megachurch pastors suddenly found intense interest in the intricate patterns of the marble floor. DeAndre, operating on pure desperate adrenaline, tried to salvage his rapidly disintegrating reality. He clung to the microphone, pointing frantically toward me. Officer DeAndre shouted, his voice cracking wildly. "Agent, she is right there. That is Naomi Davenport. She is the one you want. She embezzled millions from our trust. Arrest her. She is the criminal." The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a severe, uncompromising expression, did not even break his stride. He did not look at me. He did not ask for my identification. He walked right past me, the fabric of his windbreaker brushing lightly against the silk of my crimson gown. He marched directly toward the elevated stage, his team of agents flanking him in a tight, impenetrable formation. He bypassed Camille, who was still sobbing hysterically on the wet floor, entirely ignoring her pathetic performance. The lead agent stopped directly in front of the stage, looking up at DeAndre. He did not speak into the microphone. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his dark windbreaker. DeAndre Davenport, the lead agent, stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that commanded absolute obedience. DeAndre froze the microphone, slipping from his bloody fingers and dropping to the floor with a loud, painful screech of feedback. He looked down at the federal agents surrounding him, his eyes wide with inescapable terror. The lead agent pulled out a thick, folded, heavily stamped document. He held it up, displaying the undeniable federal seal. "I have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest." The lead agent announced, his words ringing out like a death knell in the silent ballroom. "You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, massive federal embezzlement, and systematic long-term tax evasion." At the exact same moment, two other agents smoothly detached from the main formation and moved swiftly toward Corinne. She shrank back against the cocktail table, her manicured hands raised in a feeble, entirely useless gesture of defense. "Corinne Davenport," one of the agents stated firmly, grasping her upper arm with uncompromising force. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and the illegal misappropriation of federally designated scholarship funds." Corinne let out a shrill, undignified shriek, attempting to physically pull away from the agent's firm grasp. "You cannot do this. I am a prominent citizen. I know the mayor. I demand to call my attorney immediately. This is an absolute outrage. You have the right to remain silent." The agent recited calmly, completely unfazed by her hysterical outburst. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." On the stage, DeAndre was physically subdued. He attempted to struggle, attempting to use his size to intimidate the agents, but he was quickly and efficiently overpowered. They forced his arms behind his back, the sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs echoing loudly across the stunned ballroom. The sound was sharp, definitive, and absolutely glorious. "This is a mistake!" DeAndre yelled, his voice rising in panic as they forcefully marched him down from the stage. "She set me up. Naomi set me up. You have to investigate her. She is the one who hacked the accounts." The lead agent simply shook his head, a look of mild disgust crossing his features. We have been monitoring your offshore transfers for over 6 months, Mr. Davenport," he replied coldly. "The evidence is overwhelming, irrefutable, and entirely self-incriminating. Your wife simply provided the final decryption keys we needed to secure the warrants. She is currently a cooperating federal witness. DeAndre stopped struggling, his entire body going limp as the profound reality of his situation finally registered. I was not just a bitter, estranged wife. I was the architect of his total, inescapable destruction. I had not just hacked his company. I had systematically dismantled his entire criminal enterprise and handed it over to the federal government on a silver platter. As they led him toward the exit, his bloody, bruised face turned toward me. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a look of absolute soul-crushing defeat. He finally understood the sheer magnitude of his monumental mistake. He had deeply underestimated the quiet, observant accountant he had married. He had believed my silence was weakness, never realizing I was simply gathering ammunition. I raised my champagne flute in a slow, deliberate, mocking toast. I did not smile. I simply watched him, my eyes cold and unforgiving. Corinne was escorted out immediately after him, her designer gown stained and rumpled, her heavy makeup smeared. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on the ground, finally experiencing the profound public humiliation she had so often inflicted upon others. Her precious legacy, the social standing she had prized above her own grandson's well-being, was entirely gone, replaced by the grim reality of a federal indictment. The ballroom descended into chaotic, frantic whispers as the elite guests hurriedly gathered their expensive belongings, desperate to flee the scene before they could be associated with the disgraced family. The charity gala, designed to save their reputation, had become the highly publicized stage for their spectacular, inescapable downfall. I stood amidst the ruin, the shattered ice sculpture, the spilled champagne, and the terrified whispers. I was untouched, pristine, and entirely victorious. The appetizer was served, the main course was finished, and the empire was officially undeniably dead. But the dying beast had one final desperate thrashing surge left in its system. Just as the federal agents firmly grasped Corinne's arms to physically escort her through the grand double doors, she violently dug her diamond-encrusted heels deep into the slick marble floor. She threw her entire body weight backward, actively resisting the seasoned investigators with the sheer, irrational, terrifying strength of a malignant narcissist facing ultimate public annihilation. The agents, attempting to maintain standard operational protocol, paused momentarily to avoid injuring the older woman. And that exact split second was all the opening she desperately needed to launch her final pathetic offensive. "Do you have absolutely any idea who you are touching?" Corinne shrieked, her shrill voice tearing through the stunned, echoing silence of the ballroom like a jagged piece of rusted metal. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, bulging with insane fury, and her meticulously styled hair was rapidly unraveling into a frantic, chaotic halo around her flushed, sweating face. "I am a legacy socialite. I am a foundational, untouchable pillar of the Atlanta elite. I sit on the board of directors for 7 different municipal charities. You cannot just march in here and manhandle me based on the fabricated, jealous lies of a ghetto trash accountant." The lead agent sighed heavily, clearly exhausted by her predictable theatrics, and tightened his unyielding grip on her trembling arm. "Ma'am, you need to walk forward voluntarily right now, or we will be forced to physically carry you out of this establishment." "I will bury you!" Corinne roared, flecks of spittle flying from her trembling lips as she pointed an aggressive, heavily jeweled finger at the lead agent, completely ignoring his stern warning. "I will unleash a legal firestorm that will permanently end your pathetic, insignificant federal careers. The Davenport Trust has a heavily protected, untouchable $15 million liquid reserve specifically allocated for emergency litigation. I will hire the most ruthless, aggressive defense attorneys on the Eastern Seaboard. I will tie this absurd, overreaching agency up in endless, suffocating lawsuits until you are forced to publicly apologize to my family on national television." Her sudden, aggressive mention of the legendary $15 million reserve caused a sharp, audible ripple of anxious murmurs to pass through the wealthy donors still lingering in the devastated room. That specific reserve was the absolute bedrock of the Davenport family's financial mythos. It was the ultimate safety net, the legendary financial fortress that supposedly made them completely invincible against any economic downturn, corporate scandal, or legal threat. DeAndre, who was currently being held firmly by two agents near the shattered remains of the ice sculpture, suddenly lifted his bleeding, bruised head. A fleeting, incredibly pathetic glimmer of hope flashed across his ruined face. He genuinely foolishly believed that massive safety net still existed. I did not laugh. I did not mock her desperate, pathetic screaming. I simply turned my back on the frantic, struggling matriarch and walked with slow, deliberate, lethal purpose toward the professional audio-visual control booth situated at the far left corner of the grand ballroom. The technicians manning the station immediately stepped back, visibly intimidated by my unwavering, terrifyingly calm demeanor. They offered absolutely no resistance as I reached into my elegant crimson clutch and retrieved my smartphone and a specialized, high-speed connector cable I had prepared specifically for this exact highly anticipated moment. I plugged my phone directly into the master control board. I bypassed their standard hotel security protocols in mere seconds. A specialized technical skill I had relentlessly perfected, forensic auditor. I tapped the glowing screen of my phone exactly twice. Instantly, the massive high-definition projector suspended from the vaulted ceiling hummed vibrantly to life. The enormous blank white wall behind the elevated stage, previously used to display the glittering, hypocritical Davenport Trust charity logo, was suddenly flooded with blinding, stark white light. A massive, incredibly detailed financial flowchart abruptly appeared on the wall. It was a breathtaking masterpiece of forensic accounting, 20 feet tall and 40 feet wide, displaying a complex, undeniable, deeply interconnected web of bank accounts, routing numbers, offshore entities, and catastrophic bleeding red deficit margins. The sheer scale of the financial ruin was displayed in sharp, unapologetic high definition for every single prominent guest politician and investor in the room to analyze and comprehend. "There is no $15 million reserve. Corinne," I stated, my voice amplified perfectly through the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system. I did not yell. I did not need to raise my voice. The absolute chilling certainty of my words instantly commanded total breathless silence across the entire venue. Corinne abruptly stopped struggling against the federal agents. She slowly turned her head, her wide, terrified eyes locking onto the massive glowing screen. DeAndre went completely rigid, his breathing hitching audibly as he stared directly at the undeniable mathematical proof of his own monumental, unforgivable failures. I stepped gracefully back into the center of the room, positioning myself perfectly so that I was framed by the glaring, catastrophic financial data illuminating the expansive wall behind me. The Davenport Trust went entirely irrevocably bankrupt exactly 3 years ago. I explained, my tone adopting the clinical, detached, merciless precision of a seasoned professor delivering a lecture on corporate failure. I raised my hand, pointing elegantly toward the far left side of the massive flowchart, where a series of steep, terrifying red lines plummeted drastically into negative territory. That devastating, sharp drop right there represents DeAndre's aggressive, entirely reckless, deeply pathological gambling habits. I continued, ensuring my enunciation was flawless. He was not just casually playing the stock market or dabbling in volatile cryptocurrency. He was actively criminally leveraging the trust's foundational assets to cover massive illegal debts owed to unsavory, completely unregulated offshore betting syndicates. When the market predictably crashed, he panicked and illegally drained the philanthropic reserve accounts to cover his personal catastrophic margin calls. DeAndre let out a low, pathetic, agonizing moan, closing his eyes tightly, as if that physical action could somehow make the glowing, damning numbers disappear from public view. And over here I continued, relentlessly pivoting gracefully to point toward the far right side of the sprawling, illuminated chart. This entirely separate, equally devastating web of bleeding, overdrawn accounts represents your insatiable, utterly pathological shopping addiction, Corinne. Corinne audibly gasped, desperately clutching her chest, as if she had been physically shot by my words. "You could not bear the thought of downgrading your lavish, artificial lifestyle," I stated, my voice echoing powerfully off the polished marble floors. "You vehemently refused to stop hosting $50,000 luncheons. You absolutely refused to stop buying custom designer wardrobes, rare jewelry, and luxury vehicles. When DeAndre informed you that the liquidity was rapidly drying up, you did not cut back. You simply ordered him to start quietly liquidating the primary real estate assets to aggressively maintain your pathetic glittering facade. Between his reckless gambling and your uncontrollable astronomical spending, that legendary $15 million reserve was completely totally evaporated 36 months ago. The wealthy donors, the prominent politicians, and the influential megachurch pastors stared at the massive screen in absolute horrified fascination. The raw, unfiltered truth of the Davenport family's ultimate financial decimation was laid completely bare. They were not elite, untouchable titans of industry. They were broke, desperate fraudsters desperately clinging to a sinking, rotting ship. But if the trust is bankrupt, a prominent commercial real estate developer whispered loudly from the crowd, his brow furrowed in deep, genuine confusion as he stared at the math. How did you avoid foreclosure? How did you keep the aggressive creditors from immediately seizing the properties and the vehicles? I smiled. It was the exact moment I had been meticulously, agonizingly building toward for 5 grueling, exhausting years. It was the ultimate devastating twist that would secure their absolute, irreversible, total destruction. I looked directly into Corinne's terrified, rapidly widening eyes. Because someone quietly bought all your defaulted loans, I announced, my voice dropping an octave, ringing with terrifying, undeniable, absolute power. Someone quietly stepped in and paid off every single one of your aggressive, demanding creditors, just hours before they could initiate public foreclosure proceedings. Someone deliberately fed you just enough financial rope to keep you blindly hanging yourselves while slowly, legally, and methodically acquiring 100% of your remaining assets through a highly secure, heavily encrypted blind holding company. Corinne's knees finally buckled. The federal agents had to physically support her entire body weight to keep her from collapsing entirely onto the wet, ruined marble floor. She stared at me, her mind frantically, desperately trying to process the sheer magnitude of the inescapable trap she had blindly walked into. DeAndre began to shake his head in rapid, jerky, terrified movements. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking with absolute bottomless despair. "No, that is completely impossible. The holding company is a massive international conglomerate. It is a faceless corporate board of directors." I stepped smoothly forward, closing the final distance between myself and my soon-to-be ex-husband. I looked down at him, thoroughly savoring the absolute crushing defeat, radiating from his bruised, bloody, tear-stained face. "That someone was me, DeAndre," I stated, delivering the final lethal blow with perfect, chilling articulation. The collective gasp from the remaining crowd was deafening, a massive wave of sound that filled the ballroom. The realization slammed into the room with the unstoppable, devastating force of a runaway freight train. I am the sole proprietor and exclusive owner of that blind holding company. I continued, my eyes locking onto his, ensuring he understood the absolute totality of his ruin. Every single cent of my massive, supposedly ghetto trash accounting salary was invested intelligently. Every massive bonus I earned was quietly leveraged. Every piece of inside financial knowledge I gathered, while desperately balancing your fraudulent, chaotic books, was utilized to systematically, entirely legally purchase your outstanding debts. I did not hack your company to steal from you. I simply bought you out from right under your arrogant, oblivious, entitled noses. I slowly turned my intense gaze back to Corinne, who was now weeping openly, her chest heaving with deep, violent, racking sobs of ultimate, unconditional defeat. "I own the luxury cars you drive," I stated, my voice echoing powerfully and clearly through the grand, silent ballroom. "I own the absolute deed to the massive, pretentious mansion you sleep in. I own the historical, priceless artifacts hanging on your walls. I own the very designer shoes currently on your feet, Corinne. Every single material possession you have aggressively used to artificially elevate your status and violently diminish my worth now legally, entirely, and irrevocably belongs to me." I stood exceptionally tall, the crimson silk of my custom gown flowing vibrantly around me like a pristine banner of absolute, undisputed victory. The federal agents watched the scene unfold in silent, respectful, almost reverent awe. The elite crowd was completely paralyzed, absolutely captivated, bearing witness to the most spectacular, perfectly executed financial checkmate in the entire storied history of Atlanta high society. "You are entirely at my mercy," I whispered, ensuring the sensitive microphone picked up every single chilling syllable. "And tonight I am feeling incredibly merciless. Take them away." I turned my back with absolute finality as the federal agents finally dragged them sobbing broken and utterly destroyed through the grand doors and out into the cold, unforgiving night. Everything they had was mine, and the empire was officially reborn. Everything they had was mine, and the empire was officially reborn. The heavy gilded oak doors of this grand ballroom had barely begun to swing shut behind the arresting federal agents, but the social fallout inside the St. Regis was already instantaneous, absolute, and undeniably brutal. The wealthy, influential guests, who had spent the entire evening sipping vintage champagne and fawning over the Davenport family's fabricated legacy, experienced a collective violent awakening. The realization that Corinne and DeAndre were not just temporarily embarrassed but completely, federally bankrupted and facing decades in prison hit the opulent room with the destructive force of a localized earthquake. The social distancing was not metaphorical. It was a frantic, highly visible physical retreat. Elite real estate developers, prominent megachurch pastors, and powerful city council members literally scrambled backward their expensive designer shoes, slipping on the wet marble floor in their desperate haste to escape the blast radius. The Davenports had instantly become a highly radioactive federal contagion. Influential politicians discreetly pulled out their smartphones, rapidly deleting DeAndre's contact information and permanently erasing any digital trail of their lucrative backdoor associations. Prominent investors quietly reached into their tailored tuxedo pockets, retrieving Davenport Legacy Trust business cards and shredding the thick cardstock into tiny pieces before dropping them into the nearest floral arrangements. The whispers that had previously buzzed with morbid curiosity now transformed into a harsh, unified chorus of aggressive condemnation and complete social excommunication. No one in the unforgiving, image-obsessed hierarchy of the Atlanta Black elite wanted to be photographed, quoted, or even seen breathing the same air as the family currently being hauled away under federal indictment for defrauding marginalized communities. As the federal agents briefly paused in the expansive, brilliantly lit marble foyer just outside the main ballroom doors to securely adjust the heavy steel transport shackles on their struggling prisoners, the ultimate, most devastating social blow was delivered. The crowd of elites had spilled out into the foyer, forming a silent, judgmental gauntlet to witness the final degradation of the fallen empire. From the very front of this impeccably dressed, merciless crowd stepped Vivian Sterling. Vivian was the notoriously intimidating, fiercely powerful regional president of Corinne's highly prestigious, historically black sorority. For over 40 years, Corinne had weaponized this specific exclusive sisterhood against everyone she deemed inferior. She had relentlessly used her elevated status within the organization to mock my working-class background, constantly reminding me at every single family gathering that a girl from a public university could never possibly understand true legacy grace or elite social standing. Vivian marched forward, her posture rigid, her expression carved from solid ice. She did not yell, she did not hurl insults or engage in the hysterical, undignified theatrics Corinne had displayed earlier. The regional president's silence was infinitely more terrifying and destructive than any shouted accusation. Vivian stopped exactly 2 feet in front of the weeping, handcuffed matriarch. Corinne looked up, her smeared, tear-stained face suddenly brightening with a pathetic, desperate flash of delusional hope. She genuinely believed her lifelong sorority sister, a woman she had hosted at countless lavish charity luncheons, was stepping forward to use her immense political influence to intervene against the federal authorities. Instead, Vivian simply extended her right hand, her palm facing upward in a silent, absolute, uncompromising demand. Corinne gasped, a horrible choking sound that rattled violently in her chest. She instantly understood the fatal magnitude of the gesture. Vivian was not offering a lifeline. She was serving an executioner's decree. The regional president was formally permanently demanding the return of the organization's sacred pearl badge. She was officially stripping Corinne of her letters, her exclusive membership, and her entire societal identity right in front of the city's most powerful figures. For a woman who had built her entire existence around artificial prestige and elite exclusivity, this public revocation was a fate significantly worse than death, federal prison, or financial ruin. When Corinne proved too paralyzed by shock and heavy steel handcuffs to comply, Vivian did not hesitate. She stepped firmly into Corinne's personal space, reached out with steady, manicured fingers, and physically unpinned the gleaming 20-pearl badge from the ruined, stained fabric of Corinne's custom designer gown. The sharp snap of the safety clasp echoing in the silent foyer sounded like the breaking of Corinne's actual spine. Vivian placed the heavy gold badge into her own evening clutch, turned her back on the weeping, destroyed woman without uttering a single solitary word, and walked smoothly back into the judgmental crowd. Corinne collapsed against the firm grip of the federal agents, her knees entirely giving out as she let out a hollow, agonizing wail of total, inescapable social death. Her empire was gone, her money was gone, and now her very name had been permanently erased from the annals of polite society. DeAndre witnessed his mother's ultimate execution with wide, terrified eyes. The remaining shreds of his toxic, arrogant ego were completely pulverized. He was stripped of his stolen money, entirely stripped of his unearned pride, and violently stripped of the older brother he had deeply betrayed. He was bleeding heavily, shackled, and staring down the barrel of a lengthy federal prison sentence. The sheer, overwhelming reality of his absolute powerlessness finally shattered his mind. As the lead agent aggressively nudged him forward toward the spinning red and blue lights of the waiting transport vehicles, DeAndre's legs buckled. He forcefully threw his entire body weight downward, dragging the two securing agents down with him until his knees slammed painfully onto the cold, hard marble of the hotel foyer. He twisted his bruised, blood-smeared face back toward the grand ballroom doors, his desperate, frantic eyes locking frantically onto me. I had followed the procession out into the foyer, maintaining a safe, elevated distance, my gorgeous crimson gown striking a vivid, powerful contrast against the pristine white marble. I stood tall, my posture relaxed, my expression completely devoid of mercy, sympathy, or regret. "Simone, please," DeAndre begged, his voice cracking horribly, completely abandoning all pretense of dignity or masculine pride. The man who had sneered at my career, who had flaunted his infidelity, who had viciously plotted to throw me into a psychiatric facility, was now sobbing uncontrollably at my feet like a terrified, disciplined child. "You cannot do this to me. You have taken the money. You have taken the properties. You have completely ruined my mother. Please, I am begging you, call off the federal agents. Tell them you made a mistake with the audit. Tell them you manipulated the wire transfers." I did not move a single muscle. I simply stared down at him, allowing the deafening silence of the surrounding elite crowd to amplify his pathetic, humiliating groveling. When he realized his desperate pleas regarding the stolen finances were completely useless, DeAndre frantically reached for his absolute last remaining weapon. He attempted to use his ultimate, most manipulative shield, entirely confident that my deep, unwavering maternal instincts would override my desire for absolute justice. "Simone, please think of Jalen." DeAndre roared, his voice echoing frantically off the vaulted, gilded ceilings of the foyer. His heavy steel handcuffs clattered noisily against the marble as he desperately tried to reach his hands out toward me. "You cannot send the father of your child to federal prison. Think about what this massive scandal will do to our son. You are going to permanently destroy his life. He needs his father. You cannot take his father away from him. Do not do this to Jalen." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of his statement hung in the cold air, a toxic, suffocating cloud of desperate manipulation. This was the exact same man who less than 12 hours ago in a recorded video had aggressively declared he was utterly sick of our 9-year-old child. This was the man who had actively conspired to ship his own son off to a remote boarding school the exact moment he successfully gained full custody and access to the family trust funds. This was the man who had proudly, arrogantly instructed his child to hurl boiling soup into my face to assert dominance. Now, facing the terrifying concrete reality of a steel cell, he was desperately attempting to weaponize the very child he had viewed purely as a disposable financial asset. I did not flinch. I did not shed a tear. I did not let his frantic, manipulative screaming penetrate the impenetrable absolute armor I had spent 5 years meticulously forging in the dark. Instead of responding to his pathetic, hypocritical begging, I slowly, deliberately shifted my gaze away from his bruised, bleeding face. I looked directly over the heads of the whispering, paralyzed socialites, focusing my attention toward the very back of the expansive, crowded foyer near the towering glass entrance doors. The heavy crowd of wealthy donors and elite power brokers naturally parted following the intense, unwavering direction of my gaze. Standing there perfectly framed by the flashing red and blue emergency lights illuminating the dark Atlanta night was Jordan Baxter. My brilliant razor-sharp attorney stood tall and resolute in his tailored navy suit, his hands resting protectively securely on the small, trembling shoulders of the person standing directly in front of him. Jalen was standing there. My 9-year-old son was dressed in his neat pressed school uniform, clutching a small specialized tablet tightly against his chest. He had not been safely tucked away at home with a nanny. He had not been shielded from the catastrophic, entirely necessary fallout of the evening. Jordan had brought him exactly as I had strictly instructed. Jalen stood perfectly still, his wide, comprehensive eyes locked securely onto the pathetic, bleeding, handcuffed form of the man he had once blindly worshipped as a flawless, untouchable king. The young boy had witnessed every single second of the pathetic groveling, the violent brawl, and the desperate, hypocritical pleas for mercy. The ultimate shield had been entirely permanently broken. Jalen stepped deliberately forward, leaving the protective, imposing shadow of Jordan Baxter. His small, polished dress shoes made soft, rhythmic sounds against the cold marble floor, a stark and innocent contrast to the heavy, chaotic boots of the federal agents surrounding the area. The dense crowd of terrified, whispering socialites parted instinctively, creating a wide, unobstructed path for the young boy. They watched in absolute breathless fascination as the youngest heir to the disgraced Davenport Empire navigated the ruined, glittering foyer. He walked with a posture that flawlessly mirrored the impeccable, unyielding composure I had meticulously maintained throughout the entire explosive evening. DeAndre's bruised, bleeding face instantly contorted into a grotesque mask of desperate, artificial, paternal affection. He aggressively strained against the heavy steel handcuffs binding his wrists tightly behind his back, leaning his battered body forward on his knees. He genuinely believed that his years of psychological conditioning had worked. He blindly trusted that the toxic, misogynistic garbage he had relentlessly fed our son would override the undeniable reality unfolding right in front of them. "Jalen, my boy." DeAndre choked out his voice, thick with a sickening mixture of rising panic and calculated manipulation. "Jalen, look at what she is doing to your father. You have to tell them. Tell these men that your mother is crazy. Tell them she is making all of this up because she is jealous of our family. Tell them to let me go." The sheer audacity of his request hung heavily in the freezing air of the hotel foyer. DeAndre was actively attempting to weaponize a child's trauma to secure his own cowardly escape. He expected Jalen to break down into hysterical tears, to run forward and throw his small arms around his father's neck to beg the stern federal agents for mercy. He expected the absolute, unquestioning loyalty he had tried to purchase with expensive toys and false promises of elite supremacy. Jalen did not rush forward to embrace the fallen patriarch. He did not shed a single tear. He stopped exactly 3 feet away from DeAndre, maintaining a safe, deliberate distance. The young boy looked down at the pathetic, bleeding man kneeling pitifully in the messy puddles of melted ice and spilled vintage champagne. Jalen's eyes, usually so bright and full of innocent curiosity, were filled with a profound, crushing disappointment that no 9-year-old should ever have to experience. For a long, agonizing moment, the father and son simply stared at each other. DeAndre's forced, bloody smile slowly began to falter under the intense, uncompromising weight of his child's steady gaze. The illusion of the powerful, untouchable king was entirely stripped away, leaving only a desperate, broken fraud cowering on the floor. Jalen slowly raised his left arm. Resting heavily on his small wrist was a massive, ostentatious gold Rolex, the exact $10,000 timepiece DeAndre had carelessly purchased for him just 2 weeks prior for his ninth birthday. DeAndre had proudly presented the luxury watch as a glittering symbol of the boy's inherent superiority, a heavy golden shackle designed to bind Jalen to the toxic Davenport legacy of wealth above morality. With small, remarkably steady fingers, Jalen reached over and unfastened the complicated diamond-encrusted clasp. The heavy gold watch slid off his wrist. Jalen did not hand it back. He simply opened his hand and let it drop. The heavy timepiece hit the solid marble floor with a loud, sickening crunch. The impact instantly shattered the pristine glass face and sent tiny, intricate golden gears scattering across the wet stones. The destruction of the expensive gift echoed sharply through the silent foyer, a definitive, undeniable rejection of everything DeAndre represented. "You do not love me," Jalen stated, his young voice shaking slightly, with the raw, unprocessed emotion of a deeply betrayed child, yet ringing with absolute, undeniable clarity. "You just wanted my money." DeAndre physically recoiled as if he had been struck by a bullet. The remaining blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. The realization that his own son had seen through his elaborate, deceitful facade hit him with devastating, permanent force. Jalen knew about the trust fund. Jalen knew about the boarding school plans. Jalen had heard the undeniable, horrific truth broadcasted loud and clear from the hidden tablet earlier that afternoon. The boy understood that his father viewed him merely as a disposable key to unlock a hidden vault, not as a human being worthy of genuine love or protection. DeAndre opened his mouth to argue, to spin another desperate web of lies, but no sound came out. His ultimate shield had not just been broken. It had actively, consciously chosen to walk away and leave him defenseless against the storm. Jalen turned his back completely on his weeping, ruined father. He reached a small hand deep into the neat pocket of his pressed school uniform trousers. He bypassed DeAndre entirely, walking with calm, determined steps directly toward the towering, imposing figure of the lead FBI agent who had orchestrated the raid. The seasoned federal investigator, a man who had spent decades taking down ruthless corporate criminals and hardened mobsters, immediately recognized the profound gravity of the moment. He smoothly dropped down onto one knee, bringing himself exactly to eye level with the brave 9-year-old boy. His stern, uncompromising expression softened considerably, replaced by a look of deep, respectful gentleness. Jalen pulled his hand out of his pocket. Resting in his small palm was a sleek, encrypted silver flash drive. It was the exact drive I had securely entrusted to him earlier that afternoon, right before I sent him away with Jordan to wait out the impending chaos in a secure private suite upstairs. I had told him that the drive contained the map to our freedom, and that he needed to give it to the men in the windbreakers when the time was right. Jalen extended his hand, offering the critical digital evidence directly to the kneeling investigator. "My mom said this has the offshore bank accounts my dad tried to hide," Jalen explained, his voice steadying as he fulfilled the crucial task he had been given. "She said you need this to find the money he stole from the sick kids." The lead agent reached out with careful, gloved hands and gently took the encrypted flash drive from the young boy. He nodded slowly, his eyes conveying a profound sense of professional respect. "Thank you, son," the lead agent said softly, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute reassurance. "You have done a very brave thing today. Your mother is a very smart woman, and you are a very strong young man. We will take it from here. The bad men cannot hurt anyone else now." The agent stood up smoothly, securing the invaluable piece of evidence safely into the inner pocket of his dark windbreaker. That tiny piece of silver hardware was the final devastating nail in the Davenport coffin. It contained the exact routing numbers, the hidden passwords, and the irrefutable digital footprints required to instantly freeze every single offshore account DeAndre and Corinne had desperately tried to conceal. It was the absolute end of the line. Behind them, DeAndre completely lost his mind. The final tether holding his fractured sanity together violently snapped. He let out a guttural, animalistic scream of pure, unadulterated anguish. He began to thrash aggressively against the firm grip of the securing agents, his polished dress shoes slipping wildly on the wet marble as he desperately tried to lunge toward his son. He realized with terrifying clarity that I had not just defeated him financially. I had not just humiliated him socially or ruined him legally. I had systematically, flawlessly dismantled his toxic influence over our child and won back my son's heart and mind. I had completely severed the generational curse of the Davenport family in a single masterful stroke. "You cannot do this!" DeAndre roared, struggling violently, as the federal agents forcefully dragged him backward toward the glowing exit doors. "He is my son. You poisoned him against me. You took everything. You are a monster, Simone. You are a cold, calculating monster." I did not respond to his frantic, hysterical insults. I walked swiftly across the foyer, closing the distance between myself and my child. I knelt down on the cold marble floor, completely disregarding the pristine silk of my expensive crimson gown. I pulled Jalen into a fierce, desperately tight embrace, wrapping my arms protectively around his small frame. I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling the comforting, familiar scent of my brave little boy. Jalen wrapped his arms tightly around my neck, burying his face in my hair. He was safe. He was finally permanently safe from the emotional manipulation, the toxic elitism, and the insidious abuse that had plagued our lives for nearly a decade. I looked up from Jalen's shoulder, my eyes locking onto DeAndre one final time as the federal agents hauled him roughly through the heavy glass doors and out into the freezing night. His ruined, bloody face was pressed forcefully against the cold glass of the exit as they maneuvered him toward the waiting, heavily armored transport vehicle. The loud metallic click of his handcuffs being aggressively tightened echoed sharply through the deafening silence of the grand foyer. The sound was sharp, definitive, and absolutely glorious. It was the unmistakable sound of absolute justice, the perfect ringing melody of a fully realized victory. I held my son closer, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart against my chest. The empire of lies was completely ashes. The perpetrators were bound for federal prison, and the rightful queen had officially reclaimed her throne. We had walked through the blistering fire, and we had emerged entirely unburned. The sweet, intoxicating taste of absolute vengeance lingered perfectly in the air, a flawless conclusion to a war they had foolishly chosen to start. Section 10. 1,500 words. The abrupt, undeniable metallic snap of the heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around DeAndre's wrists acted as a massive invisible shockwave, instantly shattering the remaining fragile veneer of elite civility within the grand foyer. The air was suddenly aggressively sucked out of the room. The transition from glittering high society gala to a chaotic, devastating federal crime scene was absolute and terrifyingly swift. As the lead agent gripped DeAndre's ruined, blood-soaked tuxedo jacket and roughly shoved him forward toward the spinning emergency lights of the waiting cruiser, the secondary shockwaves began to violently detonate. Darius, who had been standing with rigid, terrifyingly calm posture near the center of the foyer, finally moved. He had watched the entire catastrophic sequence unfold: his younger brother's pathetic groveling, his mother's humiliating public excommunication from her precious sorority, and the stunning revelation of my absolute financial dominance. Darius had absorbed it all without a single flinch. Now the older brother turned his intense, unwavering focus entirely upon his wife. Camille was still kneeling pathetically on the wet, ruined marble, her expensive designer gown soaked in spilled champagne and melted ice. She was sobbing hysterically, her carefully applied makeup running down her face in thick, dark streaks, completely oblivious to the fact that her meticulously curated influencer empire was rapidly burning to ash. She had genuinely believed that her secret, deceitful alliance with the golden child DeAndre would elevate her status. Instead, she had tethered herself directly to a sinking radioactive anchor. Darius walked slowly toward her. He did not yell. He did not display the frantic, chaotic rage that had consumed his brother. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and retrieved a perfectly folded, thick black plastic garbage bag. He stopped directly in front of his weeping wife and tossed the cheap utilitarian plastic bag onto the floor. It landed with a soft, dismissive thud right next to her trembling hands. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack whatever fits into this bag. Camille Darius stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble that instantly silenced her hysterical sobbing. Camille looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncomprehending terror. Darius, please, she whimpered, reaching out a trembling hand toward his immaculately shined shoes. I was manipulated. DeAndre lied to me. He forced me. Do not insult my intelligence. Darius interrupted, his tone completely devoid of any remaining affection or mercy. I saw the videos. I saw the bank statements. I saw the receipts for the European vacations you took with my brother while claiming you were on spiritual wellness retreats. I saw exactly who you are. He took a deliberate step back, physically distancing himself from her toxic, deceitful presence. You are completely out on the street tonight. Darius declared, his words ringing with absolute, undeniable finality. I have already contacted my legal team. Your personal credit cards, the ones directly linked to my primary accounts, were canceled 20 minutes ago. Your access to the penthouse is permanently revoked. You have 10 minutes to collect your cheap cosmetics and whatever remaining dignity you can find in that bag before I have the hotel security physically drag you out of my sight. Camille's mouth opened in a silent, horrified scream. In mere seconds, she had plummeted from a wealthy, admired high society influencer to a destitute, disgraced outcast, with literally nothing but the clothes on her back. She frantically grabbed the black plastic bag, her manicured nails tearing at the cheap plastic as she desperately scrambled to gather her scattered, ruined belongings. While the immediate, brutal social execution of the Davenport family was playing out publicly in the glittering foyer of the St. Regis, an equally devastating silent operation was being flawlessly executed across the city. Miles away in the highly exclusive gated community of Buckhead, the sprawling, pretentious Davenport family mansion sat quiet and dark. For decades, the massive stone structure had served as the ultimate imposing symbol of the family's elite status and impenetrable wealth. It was the fortress where Corinne had hosted her lavish, hypocritical charity luncheons and where DeAndre had plotted his reckless, illegal financial maneuvers. But the fortress no longer belonged to them. Exactly 10 minutes after I had publicly revealed my absolute ownership of the Blind Holding Company, a coordinated fleet of unmarked black SUVs pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the Davenport estate. My elite, highly compensated legal team, led by senior partners from Jordan Baxter's firm, stepped out of the vehicles. They were accompanied by a specialized, heavily armed private security detail and a team of rapid response professional locksmiths. The lead attorney marched directly to the front entrance, bypassing the sophisticated security cameras. He did not ring the doorbell. He produced a heavily stamped, irrefutable court order, a comprehensive immediate eviction notice, authorized by a federal judge, citing the massive ongoing criminal investigation and the immediate transfer of all asset deeds to my holding company. The specialized locksmiths went to work immediately. Within minutes, the heavy custom-built deadbolts on the massive oak front doors were completely removed and replaced. The sophisticated alarm system was entirely deactivated, wiped, and rebooted with new encrypted passcodes known only to me. Simultaneously, the private security detail efficiently swept the massive property. They methodically cataloged the expensive artwork, the designer furniture, and the luxury vehicles sitting idly in the expansive garage. They were not there to pack boxes. They were there to secure my newly acquired assets. By the time Corinne and DeAndre were being forcefully shoved into the back of the waiting federal transport vehicles outside the St. Regis Hotel, their precious, beloved sanctuary had been completely, legally, and permanently seized. They had absolutely nowhere left to go. The sprawling mansion, the ultimate symbol of their arrogant supremacy, was now locked tight against them. Back at the hotel, the chaotic scene was finally reaching its ultimate, devastating conclusion. The lead FBI agent aggressively pushed a fiercely struggling DeAndre toward the open door of the heavily armored federal cruiser. DeAndre was a broken, bleeding, utterly ruined man, but his malignant, toxic ego simply refused to die quietly. As the agent forcefully shoved him into the cramped, dark back seat, DeAndre violently twisted his body around. He slammed his bruised, bleeding face aggressively against the thick, reinforced glass of the cruiser's window. He glared out at me, his eyes burning with a manic, unhinged, absolute hatred. The heavy glass muffled his screams, but the raw, frantic intensity of his voice managed to pierce through the thick barrier. "You will never be happy." DeAndre screamed, his spittle flying against the reinforced glass, smearing the blood running down his chin. "You hear me, Simone. You will never be happy. You are a cold, calculating monster. You destroyed your own family." I stood perfectly still in the center of the devastated foyer, the flashing emergency lights painting chaotic, colorful patterns across the pristine silk of my crimson gown. The remaining socialites watched in terrified, breathless silence, waiting for my reaction to his final desperate curse. I did not frown. I did not show anger, sorrow, or regret. I simply looked at the pathetic, screaming man pressing his ruined face against the glass of a federal prison transport. I slowly, deliberately raised my crystal champagne flute, catching the chaotic light in the bubbling, expensive vintage. I gave him a serene, perfectly calm, entirely unapologetic smile. It was a smile that conveyed absolute crushing victory and complete utter indifference to his pathetic existence. Then with smooth, elegant precision I turned my back on him. I did not look over my shoulder as the heavy metal doors of the federal cruiser slammed shut with a definitive ringing finality. I did not watch as the vehicle aggressively accelerated away from the curb, its sirens wailing as it carried the disgraced, ruined king toward his new concrete kingdom. I simply walked back toward Jordan Baxter, who was kneeling gently beside my son. Jalen looked up at me, his eyes wide but remarkably calm, his small hand gripping the lawyer's reassuring arm. I knelt down, the expensive fabric of my gown pooling around me on the cold marble floor. I pulled my son into a fierce, desperately tight embrace, burying my face in his shoulder. "It is over, baby," I whispered, my voice thick with relief and absolute undeniable triumph. "It is finally completely over." We had burned the corrupt, toxic empire to the ground, and we were the only ones walking away from the ashes entirely unscathed. The nightmare was finished, and the new dawn was officially gloriously ours. 3 long, incredibly satisfying days later, I found myself walking with measured, rhythmic steps down a sterile, echoing concrete corridor. The environment was aggressively, unapologetically austere. There were no gilded ceilings here, no crystal chandeliers casting warm, flattering light, and absolutely no string quartets playing soft, classical background music. The heavy, reinforced steel doors lining the hallway locked with loud, definitive clangs that reverberated unpleasantly off the harsh gray walls. I was deep inside the visitors' wing of the federal holding facility, a bleak, institutional purgatory where the newly indicted awaited their preliminary bail hearings. The air smelled faintly of industrial disinfectant and profound institutionalized despair. I was escorted by a stern-faced, heavily armed female guard who directed me toward a small, windowless interrogation room. The room was aggressively illuminated by a single buzzing fluorescent light fixture that cast harsh, unflattering shadows. In the absolute center of the cramped, claustrophobic space sat a heavy, bolted-down metal table and 2 uncomfortable steel-backed chairs. Sitting in one of those cold steel chairs, flanked by her frantically whispering, clearly exhausted defense attorney, was Corinne Brooks. The physical transformation was nothing short of breathtaking. The impeccably groomed, fiercely intimidating matriarch of the Atlanta Black elite had been completely, violently stripped away, leaving only a withered, furious, heavily aged woman in a bright, humiliating orange jumpsuit. She had been stripped of her custom expensive wigs, her meticulously applied designer makeup, and her tailored high-fashion clothing. Her natural hair, thin and heavily graying, was pulled back into a severe, unflattering bun. Her face, devoid of cosmetic enhancement, revealed deep, harsh lines of bitterness and exhaustion. She looked like exactly what she was, a tired, desperate, cornered criminal. Yet, as the heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, isolating us in the small room, her eyes snapped up, burning with the same malignant, toxic arrogance that had fueled her for decades. She simply refused to accept the concrete, undeniable reality of her absolute destruction. "You actually had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to show your face here." Corinne spat, her voice raspy, but still dripping with absolute, unfiltered venom. Her hands, devoid of her precious, ostentatious jewelry, were shaking slightly as she gripped the edge of the cold metal table. You think you have won, Simone? You genuinely think a clever little accounting trick makes you invincible? I did not reply immediately. I pulled out the steel chair opposite her and sat down smoothly, placing a thick, unmarked manila envelope carefully onto the center of the metal table. I was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored ivory pantsuit, a stark, deliberate contrast to her humiliating orange uniform. I looked immaculate, rested, and entirely in control. My highly compensated legal team is currently tearing your pathetic, fabricated evidence completely apart, Corinne continued, leaning forward aggressively, attempting to use proximity to intimidate me. The best defense attorneys on the Eastern Seaboard are working around the clock to expose your massive illegal data manipulation. We are going to countersue you for malicious prosecution, extreme defamation, and massive financial sabotage. You are nothing but a gutter rat, Simone. You have always been a gutter rat. And when my lawyers are completely finished with you, you will be begging to go back to the miserable, pathetic slums you crawled out of. Her attorney, a nervous-looking man who clearly realized the absolute futility of their current legal position, attempted to place a restraining hand on her orange-clad arm. Corinne, please, he hissed quietly. We agreed to let me handle the negotiations. Aggravating her will not help our bail petition. I ignored the lawyer entirely, focusing my unwavering cold gaze directly onto Corinne's furious, wrinkled face. You are completely delusional, Corinne. I stated, my voice incredibly calm, devoid of any anger or malice. It was the tone one might use when explaining a very simple, undeniable fact to a particularly slow, stubborn child. Your expensive lawyers are actively bleeding whatever tiny, insignificant hidden cash reserves you have left. The federal case against you and DeAndre is airtight. It is a closed loop of irrefutable, deeply encrypted digital evidence. The wire transfers are completely authenticated. The IP addresses match your personal devices. The offshore accounts are permanently frozen. You are not going back to Buckhead. You are going to federal prison. Corinne scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed loudly in the small, sterile room. You underestimate the power of the Davenport name. You deeply underestimate the foundational, deeply rooted legacy of this family. I leaned forward, mirroring her aggressive posture, but utilizing absolute terrifying stillness instead of frantic energy. There is no Davenport legacy, I whispered, ensuring the quiet intensity of my words commanded her total attention. I burned it to the ground. I bought the ashes. I am the legacy now. I slowly, deliberately placed my manicured hand onto the thick manila envelope resting between us. I slid it smoothly across the cold metal table until it stopped exactly an inch away from her shaking, handcuffed hands. Open it, I commanded softly. Corinne glared at me, her eyes narrowing with deep, intense suspicion. She hesitated, her toxic pride battling violently against her overwhelming, desperate curiosity. Finally, with a sharp, angry huff, she reached out and aggressively ripped open the flap of the envelope. She pulled out a thick stack of crisp, legally formatted documents. As her eyes scanned the bold, prominent headings on the very first page, the remaining sickly color completely drained from her withered face. Her hands began to tremble violently, the crisp white papers rattling audibly in her unsteady grip. These are extremely comprehensive, highly expedited divorce papers. I explained, my voice adopting the clinical, detached precision of a seasoned surgeon. But they are not standard boilerplate filings. Corinne looked up, her breathing shallow and erratic. She realized she was not looking at financial settlements or property divisions. She was looking at something infinitely more devastating. Those documents legally, permanently, and irrevocably grant me 100% full physical and absolute legal custody of Jalen. I stated, articulating every single syllable with maximum deliberate impact. They also include highly specific, ironclad, heavily enforced injunctions granting absolutely zero visitation rights, zero supervised contact, and zero communication privileges for any member of the Davenport family. DeAndre loses all parental rights. You lose all grandparental rights. You will never ever see, speak to, or interact with my son again. Corinne slammed the papers down onto the metal table, her chest heaving with explosive, frantic indignation. We will never sign these. You cannot legally do this. You cannot just unilaterally sever a child from his bloodline. DeAndre will aggressively fight this custody petition to his dying breath. I will personally spend every remaining dime I have to drag you through family court for the next 10 years. I smiled. It was a small, knowing, incredibly dangerous smile. Sign it, Corinne, I ordered softly. Force DeAndre to sign it. I reached into my tailored ivory blazer and retrieved a second, much thinner, highly secured red folder. I held it up, displaying the stark, undeniable confidentiality seal stamped across the front. If you do not sign those custody papers, relinquishing all rights immediately and unconditionally. I continued, my voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper, the very second I walk out of this interrogation room. This red folder goes directly into the hands of the lead federal prosecutor handling your embezzlement case. Corinne stared at the red folder, her eyes wide with uncomprehending, absolute terror. She knew my meticulous, relentless accounting skills. She knew I did not bluff. She knew that if I possessed a secondary hidden file, it contained something infinitely more catastrophic than the initial wire fraud charges. What is that? Corinne demanded, her voice cracking, completely losing its previous arrogant strength. What else could you possibly have? You have already taken everything. This folder, I explained, tapping the thick red cardstock gently against the metal table, contains the meticulously detailed, fully authenticated records of the 15 years of massive systemic tax evasion you personally committed using your deceased husband's name and social security number. Corinne physically recoiled, letting out a sharp, choked gasp. Her attorney instantly paled, realizing the catastrophic, devastating implications of this new, unexpected revelation. You thought you were incredibly clever, Corinne, I stated. My eyes locked onto her terrified, trembling form. You thought keeping the primary offshore accounts legally registered under a dead man's identity would permanently shield you from IRS scrutiny. You thought the statute of limitations would protect you. But you fundamentally misunderstood how aggressively federal prosecutors pursue sequential ongoing tax fraud when it is directly linked to current active money laundering operations. I leaned closer, ensuring my final devastating threat was delivered with absolute lethal clarity. If I hand this red folder over to the feds, I whispered, you will not just get a comfortable negotiated plea deal for the charity embezzlement. The sequential tax fraud charges will carry mandatory consecutive federal sentencing minimums. You will not just go to a minimum security prison camp for a few years. You will be aggressively prosecuted. You will be convicted. And given your advanced age and the severity of the consecutive charges, you will die there, Corinne. You will die alone, disgraced and entirely forgotten behind federal concrete. The silence in the interrogation room was absolute, profound, and utterly suffocating. The buzzing of the single fluorescent light overhead sounded like a deafening roar. Corinne stared at the red folder, her mind desperately, frantically searching for a way out, a loophole, a hidden escape route. But there was none. She was completely, totally, and permanently trapped. She realized with absolute crushing clarity that I held her entire remaining existence in the palm of my hand. I controlled her money, I controlled her legacy, and now I actively controlled her very life. She looked down at the divorce and custody papers resting on the cold metal table. She looked at the signature line that would permanently, legally sever her entirely from the only grandchild she had desperately planned to use as a financial pawn. Trembling uncontrollably, completely and entirely defeated, the former untouchable matriarch of the Atlanta Black elite reached out with a shaking, manicured hand. She picked up the cheap plastic government-issued pen resting beside the documents. She did not look at me. She did not speak. She simply bowed her head, the last remaining shreds of her toxic, malignant pride evaporating into the stale, sterile air of the federal holding facility. With jerky, erratic, defeated strokes, she signed her name legally and permanently, surrendering her grandson to secure her own pathetic, miserable survival. I watched her sign, my expression entirely devoid of mercy or triumph. The checkmate was complete, the board was cleared, and the ultimate victory was finally undeniably mine. The morning after, Corinne signed her own permanent exile. I drove my personal SUV into the underground parking garage of the Davenport Legacy Trust headquarters. The building was a towering obelisk of dark glass and steel, located in the absolute center of downtown Atlanta. For decades, it had stood as an imposing monument to the family's artificial supremacy. DeAndre used to bring me here during our early marriage, parading me past his colleagues like an exotic working-class trophy he had generously decided to polish and display. The security guards who used to demand my identification and make me wait in the drafty lobby now rushed to hold the executive elevator doors open for me. They kept their eyes respectfully lowered, their hands firmly clasped behind their backs. Word of the massive federal raid, the midnight evictions, and my hostile financial takeover had spread through the corporate grapevine with explosive, undeniable speed. I stepped into the mahogany-paneled elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse executive suite. I wore a striking emerald green tailored suit that radiated undisputed authority. I was not arriving as a grieving wife or a distressed mother desperately seeking a settlement. I was arriving as the absolute owner, the sole shareholder, and the brand new executioner. When the heavy elevator doors slid open on the top floor, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The entire executive assistant pool sat frozen at their desks, staring at me in terrified silence. Phones rang unanswered. Computer screens blinked idly. I ignored the paralyzed staff and walked directly down the plush, thickly carpeted hallway toward the primary boardroom. I did not bother to knock. I simply placed my hands on the heavy custom-built double doors and pushed them wide open. Sitting around the massive, 20-foot marble conference table were the 8 senior board members of the Davenport Legacy Trust. These were the exact same wealthy, arrogant older men who had spent the last 7 years actively dismissing me. They had called me a diversity hire behind my back. They had whispered loudly at exclusive galas that I was nothing but a gold-digging opportunist who had trapped their golden boy DeAndre into an unfortunate marriage. They had happily looked the other way, while DeAndre systematically drained the charity funds to cover his reckless gambling debts, so long as their own lucrative consulting fees and luxury retreat expenses were paid on time. Now, looking at me standing firmly in the doorway, they were sweating profusely. Several of them visibly loosened their expensive silk ties and shifted uncomfortably in their plush seats. The chairman, an arrogant real estate mogul named Harrison, attempted a weak, trembling smile. He stood up shakily, gesturing to the high-backed leather chair at the absolute head of the table. Simone Harrison began, his voice lacking all of its usual booming, intimidating confidence. "We are so incredibly relieved to see you this morning. The events of the past few days have been deeply shocking to all of us on the board. We want to assure you that the governing body stands entirely ready to assist you in navigating this unfortunate transition. We are prepared to offer our full cooperation to stabilize the trust and protect the Foundation's vital community assets." I walked slowly to the head of the table, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I did not sit down in the offered leather chair. I remained standing, forcing all 8 powerful men to look up at me. "You are not going to assist me with anything, Harrison," I stated clearly, my voice slicing effortlessly through the heavy, stale air of the boardroom. "You are going to pack your personal belongings and leave this building immediately." The sudden, brutal directness of my command sent a visible shockwave around the marble table. Another board member, a retired appellate judge who had heavily enabled Corinne's complex tax evasion schemes for over a decade, slammed his hand down on the table. "You cannot just march in here and dismiss the entire governing body of this charitable trust," he sputtered angrily, his face turning a mottled, unhealthy shade of red. "We have legally binding employment contracts. We have golden parachutes. We have deeply established operational oversight. You cannot unilaterally remove us without a formal documented vote from the executive committee." I reached into the inner pocket of my emerald green blazer and pulled out a single, perfectly formatted, encrypted flash drive. I tossed it onto the center of the marble table. It landed with a sharp, echoing clatter that made several men physically flinch. That drive contains the complete, unredacted forensic audit of every single illegal wire transfer this board approved to cover DeAndre's offshore gambling losses. I explained, maintaining absolute lethal eye contact with the retired judge. It contains the exact dates, times, and routing numbers proving that every single one of you was completely complicit in defrauding the marginalized communities this trust was legally mandated to protect. You violated federal law to protect your golf buddy. You signed off on falsified grant reports. You authorized massive payouts to dummy corporations. The color drained completely from their faces. Harrison sank back into his leather chair, his mouth opening and closing in silent, undeniable horror. So here is the new reality, gentlemen. I continued, leaning my hands flat on the polished marble to emphasize my total dominance over the room. You do not have contracts. You do not have golden parachutes. You are all officially fired effective immediately for gross negligence and extreme financial misconduct. If any of you attempt to fight this termination, or if any of you demand a single penny of severance pay, I will hand that flash drive directly to the federal prosecutors who are currently building the massive racketeering case against my soon-to-be ex-husband. You can either walk out of this building right now with absolutely nothing, or you can leave in federal handcuffs facing decades in prison. The choice is entirely yours. Nobody argued. Nobody threatened me with counter lawsuits. The 8 powerful, arrogant men who had spent years mocking my working-class roots scrambled out of their chairs like terrified mice fleeing a sinking ship. They aggressively grabbed their expensive leather briefcases and hurried out of the boardroom without making a single sound. I watched them go, feeling a profound, heavy weight permanently lift off the very foundations of the building. Once the room was completely empty, Jordan Baxter walked in through the side door, carrying a thick stack of fresh, urgently prepared legal documents. He smiled, setting the heavy paperwork down on the table. "The board is officially cleared," Jordan said smoothly, pulling out a chair. "What is your first official directive as the sole controller of the assets?" I looked around the opulent room, thoroughly disgusted by the decades of fake philanthropy and elitist gatekeeping it represented. "We are legally dissolving the Davenport Legacy Trust today," I instructed, pulling a high-quality fountain pen from my pocket. "We are completely erasing that toxic, corrupted name from the corporate registry. We are rebranding the entire holding company and heavily liquidating the unnecessary real estate assets." Jordan nodded, clicking his own pen in agreement. "What is the new mission statement?" I did not even have to think about it. I had been planning this specific moment during every single sleepless night in that miserable marriage. The new foundation will be exclusively dedicated to providing comprehensive financial literacy, aggressive legal representation, and immediate emergency housing for working-class Black women navigating abusive marriages and severe financial manipulation. We are going to take the exact money Corinne and DeAndre systematically stole to build their fake elite empire, and we are going to use it to completely arm women like me. Women who are repeatedly told they are nothing but stepping stones for arrogant men. Women who are financially trapped and emotionally battered. We are going to teach them exactly how to audit their own lives, how to track the hidden funds, and how to seize the throne. Jordan grinned broadly, sliding the heavy incorporation documents toward me. "It is absolutely brilliant, Simone. Sign right here." I signed my name with bold, aggressive strokes, legally cementing the death of the Davenport Empire and the permanent birth of my own. After the paperwork was officially notarized and securely filed in Jordan's briefcase, I left the boardroom and walked down the long hall to the grand corner executive office that had once belonged to DeAndre. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The room was a massive, sickening shrine to his malignant narcissism. The dark mahogany walls were completely covered in framed, meaningless accolades. There were photos of him shaking hands with corrupt local politicians, massive silver golf trophies from exclusive country clubs, and a huge custom-painted portrait of himself standing arrogantly in front of the Buckhead mansion I had just legally seized. The air smelled strongly of stale scotch and expensive, arrogant cologne. I walked over to the massive mahogany desk. It was cluttered with useless crystal paperweights, elite business cards, and imported cigars. I picked up the sleek, heavy metal trash can resting beside the desk and placed it right on top of his pristine leather blotter. With swift, unapologetic, highly methodical movements, I began sweeping his entire professional life directly into the garbage. I knocked the heavy crystal paperweights into the bin with a loud crash. I grabbed the framed Ivy League degrees he had essentially bought with his grandfather's money and shattered the glass aggressively against the edge of the desk before tossing the ruined frames away. I swept his expensive imported pens, his custom-engraved humidor, and his pretentious brass nameplate directly into the trash. I systematically, ruthlessly purged the room of his toxic, suffocating presence until the massive mahogany desk was completely bare and spotless. There was only one item left. Sitting on the far corner of a nearby polished credenza was a small, simple silver frame. I walked over and picked it up. It was the singular, solitary photograph of Jalen in the entire expansive office. My brave, brilliant 9-year-old son was smiling brightly at the camera, wearing his crisp school uniform. DeAndre had likely placed it there just to maintain the artificial, highly profitable image of a devoted family man for his wealthy, philanthropic clients. I gently opened the back of the frame, carefully removing the photograph. I folded the picture securely and slipped it safely into the inner pocket of my emerald green blazer, keeping my son close to my heart. I threw the empty silver frame violently into the garbage can with the rest of DeAndre's ruined, meaningless life. I turned around and walked slowly toward the heavy oak door. I did not look back at the absolute mess I had made. I stepped out into the hallway, standing firmly at the threshold of the executive suite. I looked out over the sprawling, busy floor of my brand new corporate headquarters. The toxic past was permanently erased. The generational curse was entirely broken. The future was unwritten, heavily funded, and entirely mine. I raised my head high, smoothed the sharp lapels of my tailored suit, and walked forward as the undisputed, entirely self-made queen of my own empire. 3 months had passed since the explosive, definitive collapse of the Davenport dynasty. The chaotic, relentless media circus had finally moved on to other scandals. The federal indictments were completely locked in, and the painstaking, methodical liquidation of the corrupted assets was officially complete. The sprawling, oppressive stone fortress in Buckhead that had once served as my personal glittering prison was now nothing more than a finalized, heavily audited line item on a corporate balance sheet. The suffocating, heavy Georgia humidity had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, brilliantly clear afternoon breeze. I stood on the pristine, sunlit sidewalk directly outside the towering wrought iron gates of the estate. A massive, bright red and white sign was staked aggressively into the perfectly manicured front lawn. The bold, undeniable letters spelled out a single glorious word: sold. I took a deep, cleansing breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, intoxicating air of absolute freedom. I was not wearing an expensive, restrictive power suit. I was not suffocating in the rigid, performative, high-fashion gowns Corinne used to mandate for simple family lunches. I wore comfortable, faded denim jeans, a simple white cotton t-shirt, and pristine white sneakers. The heavy, invisible chains of elite social expectation had been permanently shattered and discarded. Standing right beside me, perfectly matching my relaxed, unburdened energy, was my beautiful son. Jalen wore comfortable athletic shorts and a bright, colorful graphic t-shirt that reflected his actual age, not a miniature tailored suit designed to project an artificial legacy. The heavy $10,000 gold Rolex that his father had used as a toxic shackle was long gone. In its place rested a simple, vibrant woven friendship bracelet he had proudly made himself at his brand new, wonderfully diverse public school. I looked down at my boy, deeply observing the miraculous, undeniable transformation that had taken place over the last 90 days. The arrogant, toxic sneer his father and grandmother had meticulously engineered had been completely, permanently washed away. The cold, manufactured anger that had once clouded his bright 9-year-old eyes was entirely drained, replaced by the natural, innocent curiosity he had been born with. The extensive therapy, combined with absolute legally enforced separation from DeAndre's poisonous influence, had miraculously saved his childhood in the clear, unfiltered light of the afternoon sun. He looked up at me. I saw no fear, no confusion, and absolutely no disrespect. I saw absolute, unwavering respect. I saw the pure, uncomplicated, profound love of a child who finally felt entirely safe, heard, and protected. He did not see a target to be abused. He did not see a stepping stone. He saw his mother, his protector, and his absolute hero. We turned away from the heavy iron gates, completely ignoring the massive stone mansion for the final time. We walked with light, synchronized steps down the quiet, tree-lined street toward the curb. Waiting for us was my brand new, sleek, midnight blue SUV. It was not purchased with stolen charity funds. It was not leased under a fraudulent money laundering corporate account. It was bought entirely with my own clean, fiercely hard-earned money. It represented genuine security built on a solid foundation of absolute truth and unyielding integrity. I unlocked the doors with a soft electronic chirp. Jalen climbed eagerly into the passenger seat, pulling the heavy door shut and buckling his seatbelt with a satisfying metallic click. I slid into the driver's seat, wrapping my hands around the smooth, warm leather steering wheel. The engine roared to life, a low, powerful, resonant hum that vibrated with newfound limitless possibility. The oppressive silence that used to suffocate our car rides had been entirely replaced by an easy, comfortable, loving peace. Jalen looked over at me, a bright, easy, radiant smile spreading across his young face. He shifted comfortably in his seat, the heavy burdens of the Davenport legacy no longer crushing his small shoulders. "Where are we going now, Mom?" he asked, his voice incredibly light and entirely free of the heavy performative expectations that used to govern his every word. "And what is for dinner?" I shifted the car into gear, feeling a profound, radiant warmth bloom deep within the very center of my chest. I looked at my beautiful rescued boy, the absolute center of my universe, and gave him a true, warm, deeply motherly smile. It was a smile completely devoid of strategy, calculation, or hidden pain. "We are going to our real home, baby," I answered softly, my voice ringing with absolute, unshakable certainty. "And tonight, I am going to teach you how to cook mac and cheese from scratch." Jalen pumped his fist in the air, a genuine, joyful, unrestrained cheer escaping his lips. I pressed my foot onto the accelerator, pulling smoothly and powerfully away from the curb. I did not glance into the rearview mirror. I did not look back at the sprawling stone mansion, the bright red sign planted in the grass, or the ashes of the empire I had expertly dismantled. The past was permanently, securely sealed behind us in federal evidence boxes and finalized divorce decrees. The road ahead was wide open, brilliantly illuminated by the bright setting southern sun. They thought a slap would break me. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my quiet demeanor was a symptom of weakness, an invitation to exploit, to manipulate, and to abuse. They thought they could turn my own flesh and blood into a weapon to secure my absolute destruction. They severely underestimated the quiet, terrifying resolve of a woman pushed to the absolute edge. They didn't know that for a mother, a broken heart doesn't bleed, it calculates. It analyzes. It builds an impenetrable fortress out of raw agony. I didn't seek revenge with my hands with screaming matches or with petty, meaningless violence. I used the pure, unfiltered truth, and the undeniable truth is the most ruthless executioner of all.